All right, if everyone is here and ready, I'm going to go ahead and call to order this joint meeting of the Monterey County Planning Commission and the Land Use Advisory committees at 1:33 on January the 29th. So we are currently in session, and I'm going to do this a little, it's going to be a little clumsy, but I'll let you know that we're going to call the roll at the Planning Commission, and then the clerk will call each of the Land Use Advisory Committees names, and whoever is your representative can come forward, and we'd ask that person to introduce themselves and whoever else is here from their committee at that time, just so we hear it all. And just so you know, this is meant to be a conversation, so we'll be conducting ourselves accordingly, which still means polite, but it does mean perhaps the rules for how long you can speak may be a little bit more relaxed, depending on how interesting you are. Madam Clerk, you want to call the roll?
Commissioner Shaw? Commissioner Work?
Here.
Commissioner Gonzalez?
Here.
Commissioner Mendoza?
Here.
Commissioner Gomez?
Here.
Commissioner Deal?
Here.
Commissioner Monsalve?
Here.
Commissioner Hartzell?
Here.
Commissioner Roberts? Commissioner Getzelman is absent for today, and Commissioner Shaw?
Commissioner Shaw has not so
There-
far returned from lunch.
Okay, they are not currently present. They're absent. Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you. You want to go ahead and call out each Land Use Advisory Committee, and y'all are going to be coming back and forth to the microphone because of the way this is set up. So you might want to just be ready here to be able to participate easily. So go ahead and call the Land Use Advisory Committees off.
Big Sur Luac, and then will be Kashawa, and then Carmel Highlands.
Good afternoon. I'm Steve Beck. Trey Kropp is here. Marcus Foster, Dave Smiley, John Ford. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Kashawa, Luac. And a correction, that was John Wilson, not John Ford.
Thank you.
And we're also going to be sending around a sign-in sheet, so we'll have a record of all of you that were here to listen to the training portion of the program. So make sure you sign up on that too. Welcome.
Hey, good afternoon. I'm from Kashawa, Orville, Myers, and I'm not too sure anybody else from Kashawa is here.
Well, we're glad to have you, and we do have some folks who are going to be sitting in remotely.
Carmel Highlands, Luac.
Don't fight about it, you guys.
You said we could be conversational. John Borelli from Carmel Highlands, LUAC, with Donna Costigan.
Carmel Valley, and then Castroville, and then Del Monte Forest. Carmel Valley, Luac.
Good afternoon. My name is John Heil. I'm with the LUAC from Carmel Valley, and I'm the only representative, I believe, at this time.
Welcome.
Thank you, Castroville, Luac. All right, it doesn't look like the Castroville Luac is present in person. Del Monte Forest, Luac.
Hello, Lori Litsky from the Del Monte Forest, and Rick Verbanek is here also.
Thank you both.
Greater Monterey Peninsula, then North County, and then South Coast. Greater Monterey Peninsula, LUAC.
I see no one coming forward at this time.
North County, LUAC.
Good afternoon. Leslie Noble, Andrea Estrada, and Gina Paolini are present.
Thank you.
I also see Belinda Tulubin in the public seating, so she's present as well. South Coast is appearing via Zoom, so I'll actually come back to them. South County and Toro. South County, LUAC. I don't see anyone coming forward. Toro, LUAC.
Tamara Schwartz, and I'm the Lone Ranger, so.
Well, welcome. Thank you for coming.
And then I'm coming back to South Coast because they have a provision on the agenda to appear via Zoom. So I will ask those two. Actually, I'll just do roll call for them really quick. I'm going to unmute them. Harry Harris. Don't see him on. Let me double check. I don't see him on right now. John Handy. I don't see him. Lindsay. I see Connie, Constance McCoy, Dave Nilsson, Ed, and Susan. Can you unmute to let us know you're present?
I'm Susan Newton from Kashawa, LUAC.
Thank you. Connie, are you able to unmute?
Yes, can you hear me?
Can. Thank you. And then Ed?
Was that yes?
Yes, thank you.
Good.
All right, so I'm not getting anyone else to unmute at this time. But we'll make note of everyone that's present via Zoom on the agenda as well.
Thank you. And we have some folks from other land use advisory committees who may be attending as a member of the public as well. So if you're one of those, you might just want to write a note into the address or something, email or something just to say you're here and attending if you want to be accredited with all the education that is going to occur today.
Madam Chair, I noticed one of our newest members of the Greater Monterey Peninsula LUAC arrive, so we have a representative here.
Come on down. You've been detected, so you need to come down and say who you are. Thank you, Commissioner Roberts.
Sorry, Molly.
Just introduce myself. Molly McGee.
And you're representing the Greater Monterey Peninsula Land Use Advisory Committee at this time.
That's correct.
Thank you. All right. Are we good to go? Okay. So this is the time set aside on the agenda for any member of the public to speak on an item which is not on today's agenda, which is a pretty loose agenda, so you're going to have to go some. Would anybody care to make a comment of that sort? I don't see anyone in the chambers. Madam Clerk, do we have anybody online?
We do not have any additional emails. Ed, I believe he's with the South County LUAC, keeps raising his hand though, so let me see.
Thank you.
Hi, Ed.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Do you want to just introduce yourself while you're here?
Yeah. My name's Ed Bunce, and I'm the secretary of the South County Land Use Advisory Committee. And I'm, checking in from home.
Gotcha. Thank you. All right. I think that lets us move forward into our regular agenda, which is first thing we do is we ask for any agenda additions, deletions, or corrections, and I'd say clarifications as well. Madam Clerk, do we have anything like that we'd like to share with everyone?
We do not have any agenda additions, deletions, or corrections at this time.
Okay. So welcome, everybody. As we move into our action items, I just want to start, and I think maybe a few other members of the Planning Commission might also want to weigh in and just start by saying thank you. I don't know, it's sort of a task that happens in the dark, but getting the neighborhood input on all of these ideas that people have going forward is so critical because it's an enormous county and none of us can know all of it. So we really rely on you guys, and I know that many of you have heard me say it before, but my process around receiving a proposal is to get the proposal, look at the map, look at the staff report, and then look at the LUAC recommendations. And that, for me, is a really first pass. I don't know how many others use it as well, but that's the first pass that you would get for a project that came to the Planning Commission. And so you can see how important that setting that you all provide from your feet on the ground really is for us understanding and making good decisions. And what we expect from the LUAC, we're getting in a great part regularly nowadays, which is the questions. You may not, in a point when an application comes to you, there may not be answers to all of your concerns, but the fact that you've raised them and put them on the record means that they don't get lost and we can follow through on whatever it is that needs to be followed through on that we might not know about especially, but even if we did. So I just can't stress enough how important those minutes are from a functional standpoint as well as all the institutional stuff. I use them, and I use them really carefully. So thank you, all of you, and thank you especially to the secretaries, because your ability to articulate what happened at the meeting is really what gives us the insight that all the insight we can get from you guys. The recommendation one way or the other may not be the most important thing by a long shot. It's that discussion that really helps me. And so for all the secretaries who are writing that down, thank you, thank you, thank you. I really appreciate it. Anybody else want to make any open? Commissioner Roberts.
I'll add in on that also. I tell the LUACs that I attend also that your minutes are the very first thing that I read. I read what the project description is, and then I go straight to the minutes. And any questions that you have raised, just as Commissioner Deal suggested, are questions that I then go back and as I'm reading the staff report, make sure that those questions have been addressed in one way or another. Maybe they haven't changed, but they've at least been addressed. And it's often the first question all of us have, a lot of us have for staff, was this issue that the LUAC brought up resolved and how, and, were they able to have another opinion on it or, whatever the case is. Your initial feedback is so incredibly valuable, and I sincerely appreciate it, and I know everybody up here does. So thank you for all you do. That said, I'm also going to put in my plug of numbers seem to be dwindling a little bit on LUACs, and if there's something we can do to help support you and those numbers, please let us know. I know that there's some LUACs that are kind of painfully low in numbers, and whatever information we can get out to help continue this strong community feedback is important to me also.
Anyone else? Not seeing anybody else up here.
Chairman.
Oh, there was Mr. Commissioner Gomez.
No, I just wanted to echo the same things that my colleagues said. You all play a very important role in terms of informing us and informing the community what issues are important in those neighborhoods that you represent, those communities that you represent. So I wanted to thank you. Sometimes it feels like it's a thankless job, but it's a critical job that you are doing for us, along with the supportive staff that we sent to work with you on these matters. So I appreciate you working with them and working with us and trying to find answers and helping us understand and approve projects that are truly beneficial to the communities that you live in.
Very well. All right. So we're going to go along here to our number one action item, which I suggested to the staff because in some of these past meetings, it seems to me as if we have concentrated on the training and we've left our opportunity to get and give feedback until the end. That being said, we don't want to stretch this out. So we're asking is for each of your chosen representatives, for each LUAC to come forward and to highlight, not necessarily an in-depth discussion, but to highlight up to 3 issues that were particularly notable for you in the past year, just so that we know something about what's going on. It could be that the snacks are no good, or it could be that, something, the hillside's falling down. I don't know what these might be. But if you would care to do that, and be invited to come up here, and each LUAC will give us a little insight as to what their last year has been like. And I'm counting on all of you to do this as expeditiously as possible so we don't completely preempt the trainings that are important. But I'm really looking forward to this, and I hope that you all will be as well. And at this point, I'm going to ask everybody to stay in listening mode, and then perhaps we'll respond after we've heard from everyone in case there are issues that overlap, and we can at least engage briefly on them all together. So, that being the case, we're going to start. My list starts out with Big Sur LUAC, and so I don't know who you all have chosen to be the sacrificial lamb, but one of you can come up here and model. Looks like Mr. Beck.
Thank you for the opportunity. Well, just something that came up over the last year. I think it's coming out of COVID. We had a little trouble getting the planners on board for site visits. We request site visits for pretty much everything that we do. That's important. So we've had to go back and forth and reschedule meetings and things to get the site visit in there and make sure that the projects are well flagged. Beyond that, a frustration, I suppose, is that according to the guidelines for the LUAC and the practicality of what we do is we go look at projects. Big Sur has its own land use plan, as you know, and a big part of the land use plan is preserving Big Sur in its current state as much as possible going into the future. So if there's a project that's in the view shed, if there's a little corner of a garage that's showing, we'll probably reject that because you can't build in the critical view shed. There's also, in terms of the site visits, we need site visits to the neighborhoods because there's a different set of criteria there. But the biggest change to Big Sur, looking like Big Sur going into the future, oddly enough, has to do with plants. And so there are places along the highway where trees have been planted on one or both sides that obscure the view. So the traveling public is looking at trees rather than the view of Big Sur. That also extends to the invasive plants. And at this point, we're calling not only jabata grass and pampas grass and other things, but also the Monterey pines and cypress that have been planted along the highway that obscure the view. It doesn't come up in meetings. It's the biggest change. It's not that more buildings have been built, it's more that more trees have been planted. And somebody takes a little seedling and puts it into the ground, and it's like, you know. And then it's a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger, and it's like the boiling frog. Pretty soon, you can't see the view. You can't see the ocean. You can't see the mountains. And then, of course, the invasives, where if you can see the mountains, you're not looking at the native chaparral trees, redwoods. You're looking at pampas grass, miles and miles and miles of pampas grass. And again, that just doesn't come up in a meeting that's about a project.
Gotcha. All right. So it's more a question of what you don't get than what you do.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm not done.
You better be done.
I'm close to done.
That's 3 items.
No, that was 2.
All right.
That was site visits and plants.
I thought critical viewshed was in the middle there. Okay.
No.
Okay, go.
Okay, so the other one, I suppose it came up this morning when you were talking about VSUs. But housing, of course, is a critical thing for us. You know, there's a lot of housing in Big Sur that we don't know about, but it's the housing that we have. And that tends to disappear into short-term rentals and things like that. So it's a big issue for us. And if I can slip in one last thing, Martha. The South Coast LUAC, and maybe Connie McCoy will have something to say about this, is divided at the Regent Slide. So the North Coast LUAC goes as far as Anderson Creek. Then there's miles until you get to Regent Slide, and then most of the LUAC members are on the south side of that. So I don't know if issues that are between Anderson Creek and the Regent Slide are being covered. Maybe there's just no issues. I've heard they haven't had a meeting in the last 3 years, so maybe there's just no projects.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Up to Kashawa.
Thank you. I guess you guys get me. For us, it's been a couple of years since we actually met. And I know that last year, after having this time of training, a couple of us talked, and we were kind of wondering why, after the last fires and all the structures that were destroyed out there in Kashawa, why there haven't been any applications that have been submitted and stuff for the LUAC to have to determine on. So that's something that a couple of us talked about last year when we got to this point, that we know that there's at least 30, maybe up to 50 structures that were lost in the last fires, and yet nothing has come before the LUAC on any kind of applications and stuff that were submitted to the county, evidently. So that's all we got.
That's all you got.
That's all I got.
It's only one issue.
There you go. That's it.
Made up for Steve.
There you go.
Thank you. Carmel Unincorporated Carmel Highlands. Mr. Borelli, are you going to speak for them? You'll have to speak with your colleagues.
Well, can I give two and she gives one? I paid her to come here. First of all, thank you so much for what you do. I think this process is incredible. I really enjoy it. I don't know why. I guess I'm a masochist, but I've been doing it for 6 years, and every meeting is just a lot of fun, and we get a lot done. And when the public shows up, the conversations are really good, and it's really valuable to them. You mentioned this, and I think it's an important point. Advertising for LUAC is something you could do, and I'd recommend you do it. I'm, unfortunately, the president of the Carmel Highlands Neighborhood Association now, so I'm going to put it in our Piper about how important LUAC is, and I've said this at neighborhood meetings. I'm not sure people really get it, but maybe if we combine our efforts in advertising, we could get more people to understand what it is. I'm not talking about for commission people or committee people, but just for people to understand, you know, what the value of it is, because people that come to our meetings do get value. So I really appreciate what you do, and I appreciate the process, and it really works. Having said that, there's a couple of things that I've never had a problem at a LUAC meeting with a planner. They're always project planner. They're always well up on the projects, et cetera, et cetera. But I will echo what was said, I think, by Big Sur. When we want to see the project locations, and when it's gated, the process is broken about getting us to see and access to those lots. And it's the only time I've ever had a contentious, seriously contentious conversation with someone in the planning department, because I just don't understand why we can't put a process in place that ensures us that we can see projects that are gated. We go to all our projects, we look at all of them, and when we can't get into a gated one, you know, it just diminishes our ability to do a good job. So I would echo that. I don't understand why we see lot line adjustments. They make no sense to me. I don't think they make any sense to anybody in the committee, because we can't ask, why are you doing the lot line adjustment? We're told repeatedly, John, it's not on the agenda, just rule on the lot line adjustment. Well, we know they're going to do something with it, so why would we even bother? Because we don't really know what the hell they're going to do with it. So that's a real source of challenges, and the biggest challenge was with the Valley Way project, the old hospital. And you know, you're probably all familiar with that. Okay, we saw that, and we supported it. We did a visit. We supported it. Didn't understand what they were going to do with it, but we figured it was going to be something big, and obviously it turned out the recommendation is. But Valley Road is just a tiny road, and you know, so that whole thing of lot line adjustment, what it's going to be used for, we just get shut down on that, and I don't think that's appropriate. Maybe we shouldn't even see lot lines. And the last thing I would say, I guess the only thing that happens with the ADUs that I see that brings problems to the neighborhood and discussion with the neighbor and brings the neighborhood out, in fact, is parking. You know, if we don't address parking, I forget the name of the road we had off of Highway 1 up in the woods area. I mean, you couldn't park on that you couldn't drive on that street. People were parked on both sides of the road, and the ADU hadn't even been put in yet. And we had a very contentious meeting with a lot of neighbors saying, if you allow this ADU, if your LOAC allows this ADU, you can't get an emergency vehicle in here. And so we really got to figure out how to address the parking issue. Obviously, in the woods area, it's very tight there, so it's a problem. But that's another thing that just comes up in the public a lot and in these meetings a lot, so the parking. So those are my couple of the most important ones, I think, that I see. But generally, us negotiating between architects and builders and the neighborhood works out really well. It worries me because, you know, we have to mediate a disagreement. But there are many, many times when we have asked an architect to just lower the roof 2 feet and accommodate your neighbor, or just move the hot tub to the back of the goddamn property so they're not looking at it from the dining room window. Things like that usually works out okay. So those are my things. Can Donna say something?
She doesn't look like she wants to.
Yeah, she does. She's going to take over for me.
Yeah. No, I'm not. But I do have a question, and I think it happens to many LUACs, and maybe not, but I'm new to the LUAC next to John. But my question is this: we get confused sometimes. Some projects come to us, and some don't. And frankly, we have no idea why. And we don't know how to represent that to the community. And so if you could provide us some guidance on what to tell them would be really helpful, because we have no idea which ones come to us and which ones don't, and why some don't.
That can be provided to you. We have that information.
I would really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Of course. Number 4 is Carmel Valley. Who's speaking for Carmel Valley today?
Well, keeping it to 3 will be the trick here. But I just want to echo some of the remarks we've already heard. And the first one is about gated communities, which also involves HOAs, which also involves planning department's request at this time to not consider HOAs in discretionary permits. And so that brings stuff through us at LUAC that really hasn't been properly screened from the HOAs or the subdivision plans ahead of time. And that sometimes can lead, particularly in the short-term rental area, to some confusion about whether or not the applicant should apply for the project. Another thing that came up for us is sometimes inaccurate or conflicting info in the project descriptions that we receive. where the attached documents don't line up with the project description. A recent example is about 1,000 square feet off on a field house application where we were asked to approve a 3,000 square footer. It turned out to be a 4,800 square footer. I think those are things that maybe Planning Commission could go to staff and recommend sort of a little higher level of review in the project descriptions without having to put any hammers down or anything. The second major concern appears to be around vacation rental, land use, discretionary, and operation permits, which we were recently told, and I'm sort of moving out of Carmel Valley Master Plan and into Toro, and I hope I'm not treading on any water here, but there's a July ruling. They were asked by the planners not to rule on a short-term or vacation rental because the new ordinances evidently do not require LUAC review of discretionary or operators permits for short-term rentals. This is one we hope you will look into. That doesn't seem appropriate to us. The particular planning number is 240090, and not only was that permit asked not to be reviewed, but it involved an $8,000 return of fees. So basically, you've got somebody operating an STR who had a $16,000 fee that was reduced to $8,000 as a result of going for a permit under the new ordinances. So that one might bear some looking at. The third one is that sometimes for us in Carmel Valley Master Plan, the planning staff appear to provide or seek additional routes for applicants to pursue their project, even when they're hearing recommendations for denial, particularly around redesign. When we recommend redesign to comply with the Carmel Valley Master Plan, sometimes it seems the planners will actually talk to an applicant and say, well, here's a way around that. For instance, hire this lawyer, or we'll just move it up to zoning administrator and worry about that later. So both our land use Carmel Valley Master Plan and the general plans can become, the Monterey County general plans can become involved in that. So those are the biggies for us. I guess to sum up from our point of view, the big projects that bring out people usually involve short-term rentals and outrageous designs. I don't know how else to describe it, where the surrounding houses are all 3,000 square footers and somebody wants to put in a 12,000 square foot step pyramid, for instance. And how those even end up getting to us when the HOAs disapproved it, the planners have disapproved it, it gets to the LUAC disapproves it, and then the people still have more and more opportunities to apply, in this case under the builder's remedy. But those are the concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, very helpful. All right, so we have no one here from Castroville. Anybody online from Castroville? Madam Clerk, do you know just offhand?
Ricardo Diaz is on the Castroville LUAC, and he is present. I'm not sure if he's willing or able to speak, but I will ask him if he wants to.
Sure, if he's the one we've got.
Looks like you've...
Yes, I'm online. Thank you for having the meeting. I watched the meeting previously this morning. I'm new, and thank you for appointing me, confirming my appointment, short time ago. Very new, and honored to be a part of it.
Well, thank you for stepping up, and thank you for speaking up.
Of course.
All right, if there's nobody else from Castroville who wants to weigh in at this time, I'm going to call for the Del Monte Forest. Another new face. We haven't seen this one for a while. Welcome.
It has been a while. Rick Verbenek, I have a couple of things. Let me go from the general to the sublime here. One of the things, I guess, very much in general, I think we're kind of confused by all the ADU rules, the garages and remodels, and whether they're going to be STR use and all that. It just seems very confusing. It would help if that would be simplified, clarified. Maybe it's just new and we need more experience with it, but it's at this point it's very confusing. The other thing, it's kind of general thing, you mentioned that you appreciate the remarks that we can put into the minutes about the conversations and what goes on with the projects. We'd appreciate the same, getting some kind of feedback, particularly when we do go have some conversation and there is some back and forth and discussion, and maybe we recommend some kind of contingencies. We never hear another word about it. We don't know what happened to it. So some mechanism to give us some feedback, if not immediately, I mean, because sometimes it doesn't really come up for months. And, you know, it'd be pretty tough to sit through every plan. I'm sorry to say that for you folks, but tough to sit through every planning commission meeting to find it out. But if there was some way to do that, it would help. On the short-term rentals, we're gratified that the STR rules that came out do not provide for the approvals running with the land. That was a very big deal for us. I think not having a means of either turning that off for non-compliance or, you know, that's a big deal. I think that was very important. And thank you. Our intent, our desires as far as STRs is concerned is to limit the number of commercial transient use activities. The occasional stuff is not a problem, and even a few of the commercial heavy use things are understandable that can happen, but our intent is to try to minimize those, and I think that particularly in the more dense areas of Del Monte Forest, country club area, as opposed to the estate area. It's all within Del Monte Forest, but they're very different. One's, you know, quarter-acre lots versus multi-acre lots. You can do a lot more in a multi-acre setting. The quarter-acre lots is just typical suburban. Everybody's in everybody else's face. The impact on one is an impact on several, and you just can't get around that. And it would be good if there was some mechanism in the STR approval process to get LUAC input and then honor the input from the LUAC, the locals. If we're talking about specific point solution, you know, point approvals, is that one in an area where it can be handled easily, or is it not? That's not something I think you can tell from Salinas. You need to have someone there. And the other thing is something I nag every architect about whenever they come in is fire safety. El Dorado County, by the way, has a mechanism, what they call Ordinance 5101, that essentially extends the defensible space zone rules across property lines. So that if you're within 100 feet of a structure, even if it's not your structure, you're required to comply with the defensible space rules. I think that would be worth looking into. Also, something that was done up at Lake Tahoe after the Angora fire was the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency and the Lahontan Regional Water Quality Control District, who had the authority to grant permits for tree removals and withheld those permits routinely for many years. After the Angora fire, they delegated that authority to the fire departments. Anything less than, I think it was, if I remember, it was 16 inches DBH, the fire department could authorize removal if it was a fire hazard. That's something the county ought to look into. We've got a lot of trained professionals in the fire department. We don't need to involve at least 2 other bureaucracies to handle that issue. And the other thing that's probably going to be coming up statewide, maybe I'm jumping the gun a little bit, but if there was a way for the county to incentivize home hardening, that's really the last thing that people have to fire hardening, defensible fire hardening. So for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's structures burn and create embers just like wildland fires do. And so if a house starts burning, it's as much of a threat to the community as the fire outside the community. So there's rationale for community protection. In addition to the idea that it's also protecting their own property, because the home is sort of the last line of defense. If the Highway 68 is clogged and we can't get out.
Understood. You're going to need to focus, though.
Well,
the LUAC doesn't, in fact, do all of that. So
no, but it's something. If there's property being developed, we look at what the implications are for fire threat, and these are not issues that we can enforce, and maybe not issues that you can enforce right now. But I wanted to get it on your radar.
Appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Verbanek. All right. We are now at the Greater Monterey Peninsula LUAC, where I happen to know someone came in. So come on down if you would care to do so and tell us about your last year.
Well, I'm brand new, so this will be very quick. We have yet to meet, sadly, but thank you for confirming my appointment. I'm very eager to learn. I've already learned a lot just being here today. And if there's anything I can do to spread the word in getting more members so we can actually form a quorum, I'm more than happy to do that. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you. And thank Commissioner Roberts for her continued advocacy for this particular LUAC. It's much appreciated. Up next is North County LUAC. Welcome.
Leslie Noble. I have been the secretary, but I'm trying to pass that torch presently. About the first one, which is more simple than the second one, is the Red Barn project, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with. But that project came to us the first time with already a lot of approvals in place that had never come before us before. Then it came to us, and at that time, they had decided that what they had offered to us to review was actually going to be amended, and that none of that was correct. And so how do we vote on something that is in front of us that isn't even in its final determination, design, what they're going to engage in, without that information? I mean, it was, and we're all volunteers. We came and spent quite a bit of time, and it was rather moot because we couldn't make a determination without having exactly what the project was going to be. Then they came back again, and there was a lot of discussion about the various elements that they wanted to bring, and the various outsiders that, the wildlife project, some other things that kind of were pushed out of our purview, but they were committing to having 30 events a year. And a couple of members said, oh, maybe you should have more than that. Well, that wasn't what was in front of us, so we didn't go there. Then I find out subsequently that when it came before you guys, that it was 60 events. And it wasn't the same it wasn't the same project that you had put in front of us for approval. It had somewhere in between amended itself to be twice the amount of events that we agreed to have proceed. So I think that's not a good thing. We would like the real information the first time. And if there are a lot of changes, then let's cancel the meeting and bring it back to us when you have all the information. I even had phone calls before we even had information about the meeting and the hearing, asking me if I had any questions. How can I have questions if I don't even know what the project is bringing to us? Secondly, which is a big one, we were the LUAC that had Vistra and PG&E come in front of us. And although Vistra did articulate more than PG&E did, the safety regulations were never embellished. And it's clear from what has just taken place that, that was a mistake. And all of us would like our own Secret Service now to be following us because, the neighborhood was like a Twilight mob zone. And, we didn't have all of that information or even understand how much regulation was being studied for their alleged safety items in place. And so I think that's, one that is really unfair to bring in front of our committee because, there's some science there that, we may or may not even understand. And we're going to spend, days or hours or months of meetings over some of the safety protocols so that we can, in good conscience, recommend or not recommend. So that's a big deal. And I don't know how we handle it. Obviously, you're all looking at that right now. But again, I think those are the sort of projects that I'm not sure is appropriate for the LUAC, who only gets to make a recommendation based on very scampy information relative to the project. And we have had some issues with the Robert rules in our committee, but I just became aware that our chair is going to resign. And personally, I have a couple people in mind that I know will follow the Robert rules better than they have been. So, the excuse was always, we're the Prunedale group. We can have it a little more ad hoc, but I think it's important for us to be more concise about following our Robert rules. And that's it.
Well, thank you. Thank you for bringing that forward, and thank you for the discussion of the recent fire. I think we've all really taken that to heart, and I think we'll probably talk a little more about that later. Okay, next up is the South Coast LUAC, and of course there's no one here present because since they can't get here in under 5 hours, they're allowed to attend remotely. So I don't know who would like to speak for that group, but perhaps one of you online would like to do that.
Hi there. This is Connie McCoy, and thank you for giving us the opportunity here on the South Coast to participate. I appreciate that very much. What I would like to touch on is actually has been touched on by other speakers before me, and I basically agree with those points that have been brought up. One thing, recruitment has been brought up, or they, apparently, we need more members on LUAC. We need to form a quorum. Some of us don't have a quorum. I think we do now on the South Coast, but I've been on LUAC for 3 years, and I have to say I'm probably a little rusty on all the rules and regulations, all the implications of the Big Sur land use plan. And that is because in the 3 years that I've been on, only 2 things have come across the board. And whenever you're not regularly attending to these things, you don't get a lot of practice in applying the rules. And so I want to point out that after the CBP, the Customs and Border Patrol presentation to put up an 80-foot tower in Lucia, and there were 4 members of LUAC, and I was a new one. And when I realized that my fellow LUAC members actually had no interest in this proposal, and actually that proposal was the CBP did eventually withdraw from that proposal, but I decided I wanted to, and I realized we didn't even have a quorum, so I did recruit. I went to a lot of effort, and we got 3 more members on the LUAC down here. But as far as joining LUAC and applying for LUAC, whenever I applied for LUAC, months went by before I heard anything. And I would, and eventually then I contacted Brandon Swanson, and he was the head of the department at the time. And he kept checking, and he would say, well, I don't know why, Connie, I don't know why. And I thought, God, did they find out something about me they don't like? Anyway, I eventually got on LUAC. But then when I recruited, one of the members who applied also had a very difficult time. Or not a difficult time, but months went by. So I guess what I want to say is I think there needs to be a little bit more transparency in reviewing people, and maybe keeping people informed of where their progress is in getting approved for LUAC, and if there are any glitches and things that need to be attended to or explained by the applicant, that should be streamlined. So that's all I have to say on that. The other thing is, okay, I'm down here on the South Coast, so it's hard to connect with other members. Of course, other members on the South Coast, yes, but even though there's a Big Sur LUAC and a South Coast LUAC, we really are one community. And many of the things that come up on the South Coast are of interest to the North Coast, and vice versa. And in the past, it appeared that we would have, if something was on the docket, of course, we haven't had anything in 3 years, so I don't know if it's still happening. Those meetings were on the same day for the Big Sur LUAC and South Coast LUAC, and at the same time. So I would like it to be considered that these meetings, get-togethers of the LUACs would be on different days or different times, and that is so that South Coast LUAC could participate with Big Sur LUAC and vice versa. Okay, another thing is, I can't cite any specific examples, but I think other members brought this up earlier, of we see things happening and we're like, well, gee, why weren't we told about this? Why weren't we given a chance to participate? And this was actually a concern. This person's no longer on LUAC, but it was a Big Sur LUAC member, long-term member of the community, took a big part in the creation of the Big Sur land use plan. And that person also expressed the same feeling, like, we see these things happening and nobody mentioned it. Nobody told us. And so I guess I would like an explanation of what is LUAC supposed to, what are our expectations? I seem to be ignorant myself, but I don't think it's only me, about, well, why weren't we consulted? And okay, one more thing.
You're over your 3.
I think about it. What? Oh, I'm over my 3. Okay. Is there any way to facilitate LUAC members meeting on our own? I think we talked about doing that with the Big Sur LUAC, and we were told that we had to actually have county approval, or the county had to plan the meeting. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. I think in 2 of those items, the secretary and the staff will help with the jurisdiction of what you see and what you don't see at a LUAC going forward. And I think council will help you understand the getting together question, because that is fundamental to our role as a public meeting with notice and all that, and agendas and all that kind of thing. So I think that's going to come up later too, but thank you very much. Next up is the South County LUAC. Do we have anybody remotely? I don't think we have anybody here in the chambers. Anybody on line that says that they could speak on that?
Yes.
All right.
Yeah, Ed Bunce from the secretary from the South County LUAC.
Right.
So my first comment is that Commissioner Getzelman lives in Lockwood. I see him all the time. He's totally involved with our community. And so from a planning commission perspective, we're well connected. I only have one thing, and I've heard this from some of the others. Are we getting projects that the community should know about? And I think the answer is no. We've had one LUAC in 3 years, and we got burned with a 120-foot cell tower that went in with a permit, said there's no South County LUAC, and they approved the project, and we're stuck with this thing. So it's very notorious. We need the discipline in the planning department. We're a long ways away. We're very rural, spread out. It's an unusual circumstance. We need the discipline in the planning department to call LUACs for projects that are going on. I can't believe I've been on it for well over a decade, and to have 2 meetings over a 3 or 4 year period is ridiculous. They have to be projects going on out there that need attention. And the last one we did, it was just the community started asking questions. Why is there an airport going in near Fort Hunter Liggett in this open space? Well, it was a tech billionaire wanted an airstrip and didn't apply for any permits. So we didn't hear about it. We had to tell people to start the process. Anyway, the guy was good and he put his permits in and we had a LUAC. That's the bottom line. Please impart the discipline in the planning department and err on the side of having a LUAC. It's not that hard. We can meet if there are some neighbors or local people that have some issues. We can just talk about it and provide it to the planning commission. So there you go. We'd like to see the projects before they happened and they're catastrophic. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to put in a word for our staff saying that I'm not aware of them doing anything that is not directed by the rules under which they operate. And we're going to go into those in a little more depth here in a bit. So I'm very touchy about people alleging any kind of inappropriate activity on the part of the staff. I'm sure you didn't mean that, but it's a trigger thing for me. So I just want to say we don't do that. I won't entertain that particular allegation without a lot of proof. So other than that, I do appreciate people wanting to know why they see some projects and not others, and I think we can certainly add some light about that. And then we have, last but not least, we have the Toro LUAC. So if you want to come on down and chat about that.
Thank you. Okay, a couple of things that come to mind have already been brought up. One of the things was the site visits, which have been a problem, especially if it is behind a gate. I know that there was one case, there was a chicken farm going on up at San Bernardino Road, and it was difficult to see the site flags and everything else, and difficult to even, I guess, cooperate in some way. I don't know all the specifics, but that was a difficult project to even get a site visit. Some of the site visits are like an hour right before the meeting. And sometimes logistically, when you're dealing with Highway 68, it can be difficult to make it back to, 4 o'clock to have the meeting begin. Also, with a lot of the things that are online now, it's become a problem where we're not able to access it. And we brought that up into some of our meetings at the time. And to try to pull up site lots, it's very difficult to read when they're so microscopic that even my reader glasses at 200 can't even see. So if there's any way that maybe they can bring hard copies, that would be a plus. Also, the lady that was talking about the Red Barn, it brought up something to my mind about the gasoline station along 68 in Corral de Tierra. There was a couple things that we had discussed and talked about and asked about that project, like how high it was going to be. And I remember they said, oh, well, we're going to change that. And I really think that I'm uncomfortable with okaying a project and then having to write all these conditions based on that they change this and change that, because maybe they're not being changed, or maybe somebody doesn't see the minutes or write the minutes correctly. And the project with the gasoline station on 68 in Corral de Tierra, a lot of gas stations that come in, they have their own rules and regulations as to their height of their signs and how big they have to be. And I think that when somebody comes in with a project and they already have an idea of putting a gas station in and also a convenience store, that I'm pretty sure that they might already know what gas company they're going to go with and also their regulations, because it could be a franchise. And it might not be in compliance with the scenic highway along 68. I mean, you don't want to drive down 68 and see a big ARCO sign 15, 20 feet up in the air. So I think that that's important, that things of that nature need to be looked at and brought to the LUAC attention, because, like I said, these gas stations have their own rules if they're going to sell their gas, and that is something that needs to be done. I think that's it. I think that some of the other people had already touched base on some of the other items, so that's it, and thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Very well thought off. I want to thank all of you for coming forward with that. And I'm going to just ask if there are any general public comments at this point briefly about anything you've heard. For those who have not been part of the LUAC, we just want to let them have a chance to weigh in. We've got a couple of hands up that I see, but I'm not sure whether those are LUAC members or guests.
Susan Newton is a LUAC member. Would you like to speak?
Yes, I'm from the Kashawa LUAC. And one of the things that I think we can bring up here that we're concerned about, well, first, as Orville said, that we've not had a meeting in 3 years is a concern. But the other thing is, we used to have a LUAC, a Kashawa LUAC area plan. And that was taken away and substituted with a one-page plan that was not developed by Kashawa. We have wondered how this happened and what we can do to reactivate our original plan.
Thank you.
So that's
interesting point.
Thank you.
I actually personally know something about that, but we won't do that right now. So just general public comments again briefly on what we've just heard from the LUACs.
Margie Kay.
Thank you. I was a LUAC member of the North County Coastal for 7 years. And it was very satisfying. I was the secretary. I thought that it was important to represent what was said at the meeting, some of the discussions. There was more boxes to check in those days. When I've looked at the template of the LUACs from the minutes that are produced with the applications that come forth, where, yeah, I also look at the LUAC recommendations first, and it's limited in what they can do. I think they need to be able to give more feedback and not just check off a box. And I want to praise all the people who are volunteers and on the LUACs. It is a very important job, and what I've heard today on the issues and stuff, thank you. You've really spoken well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kay.
And then we have JLD84. You should be able to unmute.
Thank you. I'm part of the LUAC for Kashawa, and I was going to address the same question that Susan did. we had a 60-page area use plan, and it was reduced by Carmel Valley's LUAC. It was given to Carmel Valley's LUAC when we had a break where we didn't have enough volunteers. And it disappeared, and it was replaced by something not created by our community. We were not notified of this. I found out when I talked to the county about it. So I think it's a really serious issue because, a lot of people worked very hard on that plan. It is what the community wanted. And the view shed protection was a big part of that. So thank you for listening to me out of turn.
Thank you. And for the record, is this Janice Dickinson?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm not named JLD 84.
I was happy to address you in that manner if you chose. Well, thank you very much. I don't see any more hands up. Am I missing anything, Madam Clerk?
No, we have no additional hands up on Zoom and no new emails.
Excellent. I'm going to move on to some responses, starting with Ms. Beretti is prepared to at least touch on some of the things that we've written down from what we heard from everyone. I think she's going to start with the things we heard most often, or maybe the easiest ones. I don't know.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chair. I think the first thing that I just wanted to review with the LUACs, we really, in planning, really try to balance all of the different requirements for projects and be consistent with what is being referred to land use advisory committees and how the committee is, what aspects are viewing, so that to be consistent with the guidelines as adopted. So I did want to just point to, bear with me one second, I'm sorry. So resolution number 15-103, which is the current resolution adopted by the board that governs and has the guidelines for projects that come to land use advisory committees. And so let me get to that section, and I just want to hit the highlighted points.
That is on our agenda coming up, so we will go into it a little more depth in item 2 here.
Yes, but just generally, those guidelines that were established by the Board of Supervisors are what staff follow. It does the high level. It includes development requiring CEQA, lot line adjustments with conflicts, variances, or other types of design approvals, and then things that are specifically referred as matters of interest from the board, commission, and or chief of planning. So generally speaking, that is what staff falls into. There have been, I know that was mentioned, there have been the particular circumstance with the South County LUAC that was brought up. There have been instances where that are a little bit more out of the ordinary, and that I think was one that fell out of the ordinary. So we'll go more into that specifically. One item that did come up, in particular, the question or comment about vacation rentals and their referral to LUACs. So while we were in the process of developing updated regulations with regards to vacation rentals, there was a specific direction from the Board of Supervisors at one point that we would bring all vacation rentals would come before the Planning Commission. And as a part of that, due to the controversy and concern during that period as well, those were being brought to LUACs. With the new regulations, it was the intention that those are, the regulations themselves are much clearer now and give more direct and clear guidance on approvals for vacation rentals, while still affording a hearing process if they are receiving a use permit or coastal development permit once those are adopted for the commercial vacation rentals. So those do go to hearing process at the zoning administrator. So they still do have the public. So that is why that switch happened, because we were under the new regulations and they were intended to address some of these broader concerns while still offering an opportunity through the zoning administrator for public hearing and input. Another item that I heard the question around site visits, and I have in my mind a number of different circumstances and cases where I know there had been challenges on site visits. Staff does try to coordinate and does try to work with getting site visits for LUACs when requested. On occasion, it's challenging from a scheduling perspective to do an organized site visit, and I know oftentimes, at least the intention is for staff to remind advisory committee members as well that you're welcome to go and view publicly, in particular for projects that have public viewshed impacts, because you should be able to assess those from the public viewshed. There have been instances behind gated communities where I do recognize there have been challenges in getting access for the LUAC to come onto the property and visit. And staff does try to work with those property owners. But in the end, it can be difficult to compel the requirement that they open their property for individuals to come on those staff as an extension for those permits. So I know that there have been some challenges there, and staff does try to address and work with the LUACs and work with the applicants to move forward. So generally speaking, I also noted which LUACs have indicated their concerns. So I think one thing as well, for some of the more specific cases and nuances, I'm going to go back and revisit with staff to get a little better understanding of the recent history of what has happened with particular projects, sites, and the LUAC in particular, to also try to figure out where the challenges came from. Were they scheduling? Were they access or other pushbacks? So I will also look into those a little further to see and make sure that we have some better consistency going forward. And area plans. One other item. There was another item in terms of, well, now I'm going to go to area plans. Sorry. No, that's okay. There was a specific question that came up around Kashawa, and actually I wasn't here, I wasn't with the county at the time that the 2010 general plan was adopted, and so I will give a general answer to that, and perhaps someone with a little better history can respond more specifically. But during the update to the general plan leading to the 2010 general plan, there was an effort to try to consolidate and bring any matters that were not exclusively area specific into the general plan proper, and have the area plans have more specific call outs where it is very specific and different for those areas. In terms of what was selected to remain in the reduced size Kashawa area plan versus what was no longer there, since I wasn't here at that time, I can't speak. And so I will look to see if someone with more history has anything else they can add to the conversation in that perspective, from that perspective.
She's looking at me, but I think Commissioner Roberts was there too. And Mr. Commissioner Getzelman is conveniently absent. Yes, there was a long, hard-fought battle in public over a long period of time of what the area plans were going to contain in terms of in relation to the 2010 general plan, which was, as you all know, only covers the inland areas of the county, because we couldn't even get there with the coastal ones. So that was a long, and I know, I understand people who weren't there might not think so, but there was testimony at numerous occasions and places and long discussions about this, and exactly as Ms. Beretti said, that there was a strong desire on the part of the county representatives in particular, but I think a lot of folks in terms of equity and trying to be clear, to make the area plans be less flowery and more specific to the area they're talking about, so that we didn't end up restating a general rule that applies to everybody in the county slightly differently in the area plan, which leads to a real confusion about what governs. So if it says may and shall, and they change from one to the other, it can take hours and lawsuits. So there was a strong push to try to bring things down to the very specific items that make an area different from all the other areas. And that's what resulted is an incredible shortening of each and every one of these plans. But I would strongly take issue with any notion that any of that was done without significant public review over a period of time of years. And during part of that time, the Kashawa LUAC was not as active as it might have been. So that may be also part of that feeling, and that probably we would have been well served to have a really robust presence there helping put forward issues of concern for Kashawa. But you can only do what you can do. We did at that point, much of it, we had a commissioner who lived in Kashawa, so it wasn't like there wasn't anybody there. But that did happen. It was official. It did happen in public, and I'm with you. I see what happened, and I don't know what to tell you except that I suppose you could advocate for a review of your area plan at any point you might want to, but I don't know beyond that. It's a change to the general plan, so it's a pretty high lift. So, but Ms. Moretti was correct. That's what happened. I can just say it was public because I know it was there. Anything else that you want to add?
I did. I had, so there were different flavors of it, not just the confusion of what comes, but I think I definitely heard quite a number saying that also kind of this question of of project descriptions not being stable and or having some inconsistencies when they come before the LUAC, making it challenging to provide that feedback. I heard some comments as well of feeling that of circumstances where, from the LUAC perspective, what comes and was before the LUAC and what comes before the Planning Commission is different, but I heard from some, feels like a substantial change from what was considered. So I think I think what I wanted to just be able to provide generally in that perspective. Oh, and then some items that you would have expected would have come to the LUAC that didn't actually come to the LUAC. And so again, without going into case specifics, just from a general perspective, again, we definitely, staff tries to be consistent with what we bring to land use advisory committees. We do our best to have it be a stable project description and have everything clear and concise. However, there are often changes between along the process as inputs coming not just from the land use advisory committees, but other reviews and the planner's review and iterations. So we do make every effort to make sure that what comes before the LUACs is as stable of a project and clear as can be. And if there's a substantive change, we do try to catch that should it warrant coming back to the LUAC before the Planning Commission. I will revisit, and I'm very open. It will help me. I'm relatively newer in chief of planning position, and so I'm also very open from the individual cases that you all shared from your LUACs. I'm very open if you, some you mentioned, but I think where there's others, I'd like to hear directly what were the circumstances, what were the projects, what were the cases, so that I can better understand where we had system challenges to how we process versus were they individual project or staffing nuances. So I look forward to hearing a little more detail so that I can come back and review at a little finer line for each of the LUACs and what's unique in particular about your experience and your circumstances.
So I'm hearing Melanie say that you can contact her.
I did say that, yes.
That's the informal portion.
Yeah,
of the
and I
program.
invite that because it does help. Again, it helps me understand where we need to look at our processes, where I need to work with our team to have a little better clarity to make sure we're catching things versus where they're one-offs and I need to either look at project specifics or just individuals and how we're bringing things forward. So thank you for that too. And I believe that was the last thing that I just wanted to be able to address kind of as a whole in general and really encourage you for specific items to please reach out to me as well.
Thank you, Ms. Beretti. On my notes, I had a couple mentions of things that get reviewed are not with respect to ADUs. And I just wanted you to weigh in briefly on what limits we have of the discretion based on state law.
Yeah, so I think some of the comments, thank you for that, accessory dwelling units, so a fair amount of housing law, including accessory dwelling unit law, has changed very rapidly over the last, say, 5 years, with the state really implementing new regulations, new laws to limit the ways in which local jurisdictions and authorities can review and restrict or approve or deny different housing projects. So in general, that has been changing. So some of the confusion is because we are trying to keep up, not just with ADUs, but state housing law in general. Particularly in the coastal zone, there's been a lot of confusion because we have been dealing with a situation where there are dueling state law. There is state housing law for accessory dwelling units, in this case in particular, and there is state coastal act. It has taken a while for those two state entities to work together to give better clarity for how to local jurisdictions for how to handle things in the coastal zone. So some of in the coastal zone in particular, the lack of clarity was because there has been challenges and lack of clarity in terms of how the state ADU law and state coastal act and our local LCP, local coastal program nexus. We've actually, happily, we have our coastal regulations. We've been working with the Coastal Commission on those coastal regulations for accessory dwelling units, which incorporate and are consistent with all of the current state law and attempt to reconcile some of the inconsistencies between with ADUs in our local coastal plans. That is going before the board on February 4th, and then we'll go to the Coastal Commission for certification. Those rules will provide a lot better clarity with regards to accessory dwelling units and ways in which will be, and really it's a lot of it is towards streamlining the approval process for accessory dwelling units and other certain types of housing. So those will provide some much clearer regulatory guidance and rules around accessory dwelling units, and we really look forward to having that clarity for our staff, for applicants, and for our community members and public.
Yeah, two things on that. One of them is ADUs may not be used as vacation rentals. So there's no situation in which an approved ADU is going to be officially allowed to be a vacation rental. So, I mean, obviously enforcement is enforcement, but that is the standard. And then I believe we're told that we couldn't reject a proposal for an ADU based on parking. I think that was something that maybe I heard it wrong, but at one point we were discussing the rules, and that was not one of the things that the state let us review. I think. Did I get that wrong?
Yeah, I don't. There are limitations in state law for parking requirements for accessory dwelling units and junior accessory dwelling units. Again, in the coastal zone, there's a little bit of an exception, and in fact, the regulations that are moving forward, even though state housing law says we cannot require parking, on-site parking for certain types of accessory dwelling units, to reconcile that with the Coastal Act and coastal access, there are certain areas that are mapped, that are proposed as being mapped, where in those areas we are able to require parking so that it does not inhibit coastal access. But yes, state law does dictate with regards to parking and other considerations like setback or other things for what we have discretion to require accessory units to adhere to versus no.
Thanks. I mean, this is all very much surface discussion, but I just wanted to at least respond to some of these things. Commissioner Roberts?
I just had one thing that the Secretary didn't mention and I think is an easy fix. And I heard several people say, you review a project, it comes to us, and you have no idea whatever happens to it. And to be honest, in some ways, that sometimes happens to us. We review a project, staff tries really hard to give us the update of what the board decides or what happens to it after that. But I'm always wondering, oh yeah, what happened to that? So that hopefully the planner assigned to each of your LUACs can track that and provide that information. Maybe it's even on the LUAC specific website. Here's the projects reviewed. Here's the PC link to it here, or include them as interested parties when it comes to the Planning Commission. For example, this morning we had a project from the Del Monte Forest LUAC that had been reviewed by you. It was reviewed July 2023, so it just finally came to us. So that's unfortunately sometimes the timeline of what happens between when you guys see it and when we get it and whatever happens in between. So if we can keep that feedback loop so that everybody knows and could potentially have participated today. You know, if they realized that that was happening today, they may have showed up as public or as representatives of the LUAC and said, yeah, no, that's not what we said, or yes, you know, whatever. I think that would, for me personally, would be an important feedback loop.
Yeah, I want to thank you for that, because we have had discussions to make sure that we do add and include LUACs on the interested party list when that project had been referred to the LUAC. So I'll go back with our team and revisit that to make sure that we're incorporating that going forward, because that is the most, I think, the easiest and most consistent way. Sometimes projects don't move quickly to the hearing body. Sometimes they move very quickly. So I think making sure that there's always that LUAC as a part of the interested parties, so that you do, when there's the next public hearing step, you're informed that that's happening, would be important.
Thanks. I have one more thing and it's more in terms of, again, an opinion statement, but to highlight an ongoing tension we've always had with the LUACs. And the first part is we want LUAC input to be given at the point where it can be most effective. And for most projects, that's early on, because when people get invested in their specific project, they find it harder to change direction. So one half of us is saying, we really want the LUAC to weigh in early on. And we've actually, over the years, included an agenda item for a no harm, no foul introductory visit that an applicant would be allowed to make to a LUAC to get a community feel, to try to even bring that further down the pike. So people are having a chance to talk to their neighborhood representatives early in the project while they're still fluid. At the same time, the LUACs want to know as much as they possibly can before they decide. So you can't have both, because if you're really effective at that early stage, then the project is going to change if there's a problem with it. You want that. That's like a sign of success. On the other hand, some of those changes happen for other reasons besides what the LUAC said. We can't be sending applicants back to the LUAC every time it changes, because then we overrun our commitment to them to process their project in an appropriate fashion. So we don't have the ability to provide that ongoing loop of back to the LUAC at each point. Brings me to my personal sense of what the best solution to this is, which is back to what I said at the very beginning. The LUAC recommendation is the least important thing that you send, as far as I'm concerned. If you have, as a LUAC, raised an issue, and it's down there, whether or not you think it was resolved by this project is less important to me than you've got it there, and I know I have to look at all the things about that and see what the answer to that is before I can know what to think. So, again, for me, it stresses the need to be as expansive as you can honestly be about what issues were raised, even if you felt they were resolved. Something that was of concern to the neighborhood, particularly things that we might not otherwise know. Because I'm really pretty hard over on we want the LUAC early. We want people to know early what the neighbors think. And I'm willing to sacrifice some amount of, you don't get to see every project piece of information, because maybe we're going to ask for some environmental work based on what the LUAC asks. We don't know yet. So of course you don't have it until you ask it. And we can't make that. Those applicants are also our constituents, our community members, the people who are doing the things that we want them to do. So we can't unduly require them to keep going around and around in this cycle. As you know, things are complicated already. So I just want to put in that pitch for, even if the project changes, if your decision was based on some aspect of the project that you thought was going to be like it is, say you thought there were going to be, it was going to be 1,200 square feet and it turns out to be 12,000 square feet, that would be something we would guess was a significant change. And you will hear people at the Planning Commission say, when did the LUAC see that project? And we have upon occasion sent things back at that point if we felt that the change was significant enough. But sometimes we don't, because we say, okay, the LUAC highlighted that as an issue, we feel it was addressed in this plan, or we feel it wasn't addressed in this plan, and so we make our decision accordingly. So I don't know if that's actually useful or not, but just the timing of bringing things to the LUAC has long been a tension between that early and the complete. And I think all the thinking you all want to do about that and talk about how you feel your input is most effective in your community as well as in the process. I know that I would be really open to any of that, and I think most of us would be, and maybe we can tweak things for the better. But fundamentally, it's always been a problem, and it continues to be a problem. But we're all looking at it as how we can get the most out of you guys, so we're really exploitive. So we want early at this point. That's kind of the way we've faded. Does anybody else on the commission want to say anything about this? Commissioner Gomez?
LUAC member Noble raised the concern and fact that she voted on a very complicated issue, right? Like the planning commissioners and at the time of the application for the original application for the Vista Battery project, I think those, based on that information at the time, that you guys had, is probably the best decision you could have made at that time. But I think that in light of the current situation, we have new facts and are waiting for additional data. So that situation might have changed as of today. But at the time, I think that you weren't the only persons that had a tough decision to be made. And based on that information, I think it seemed like the right decision at the time, right? And I wasn't a member of that. Again, I wasn't a member of the Planning Commission at the time, but, I also understand that you make decisions based on the information that's in front of you.
I couldn't agree more myself, but I would add to that I would rather make any decision with LUAC input than without it. So whether or not the LUAC feels that they have the answer, your input is still valuable. So say that's a great example. The LUAC says, we're deciding this based on these things that we see now. That would be helpful, even if it's not the whole picture. So you don't have to be determinate about everything, but you have so much to bring. I would rather have it than not. Ms. Beretti, did you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I think that just prompted, the one thing also there, just as a reminder that the LUAC recommended is one recommendation and input is one lens that is used to review and bring projects forward. I know for example, with the Vista project, the example was made based, we're not the experts on what's appropriate safety design and planning. Those are things where, for example, there are other rules, regulations, laws in place and others that have that lens. And we, even as planners, look to, those appropriate experts through the review process to provide the input and provide it to help inform ultimately our staff recommendation that comes before the commission. And so I think that is something that I think I want to really emphasize for the LUACs. And I think it gets back to Commissioner Deal's point and others that the recommendation and where you vote is important, but almost more informative is where you flag for us what is supportable and what are the concerns and questions and issues with regard to the project, because those do carry forward as that project moves forward to ultimately make sure that we've done the best we can when it gets to that ultimate approval. So I think it just also re-accentuates that because you all are providing that community neighborhood lens. Your approval doesn't say we're the experts and we know that this is going to be 100% safe. And so I think that that's just, please allow yourselves to recognize that simple limitation of perspective that you're able to bring for the review of projects as well.
Yeah, and I would, again, I think about this a lot and say sometimes, like in the case of Vistra, I felt as if I had relied on expert opinions that were obviously wrong. So I made a decision that in retrospect I regret. But I am also aware that given the information I had at the time, it seemed like a good decision, and you can only do the best you can when you are where you are, and learn from that. And I think it just makes a good example of how that works. Sometimes you're wrong, you know? Do the best you can, you're still wrong. It's human. Any other commissioners before we move on to the next item? Commissioner Mendoza.
Yeah, the only comment I have in reference to North Monterey County, they brought up the Red Barn. If it was 30 events per year and it's 60 events per year, that's a significant difference. So consequently, if they base their opinion based on 30 events a year and now you come up with 60, I don't really think that the information they're providing us is kind of accurate. At what point is there a trigger where it goes back to LUAC and they get to give us that information based on the accurate information they have at the time, and also the Vistra? I agree. I mean, based on the information we had at the time, it totally makes sense. The expert said, you know, everything checked out, the zoning was adequate. If based on that information, that's where we made the decision that it made sense. But I agree. Now the information we have today, we would probably go in a different direction.
Are you waiting? Commissioner, do you want to respond, Ms. Beretti, before we go to Commissioner Gonzalez?
Yeah, and I don't want to go into back and forth on any particular project, but I think there is a little discrepancy between kind of at least what was presented and what's actually came, that yes, there was a change, but it was also part of the discussion with the Red Barn item. And a part of the consideration by the, and I'm trying to look in the minutes, but by that recommendation from the LUAC that it was appropriate to consider more events at the site, that 30 seemed low. So from staff's perspective, we felt we were consistent coming forward with what the LUAC had indicated, and I'm trying to find it in the minutes, but again, I don't want to go into any particular case. We absolutely, if there is something that seems like a substantive change that would warrant to go back, and I am going to look back into that particular case, but I think there's a difference in perspective on that one from between the two that I'd rather have the time to go back and reaffirm.
And I think it also might be good to remind ourselves and our planners to highlight places where the application has changed since the LUAC saw it in every application. So if it's like nothing has changed, that's one thing. We went to the LUAC and then these things changed, that would also, even if it's just coming to the Planning Commission so we know. So we can always send it back if we feel that we need to. Commissioner Gonzalez and then Commissioner Monsalve.
Thank you. And again, thank you for all the work that the different LUACs work on and do. But I think part of the reality is that, as some of the commissioners have mentioned, is that some of the recommendations or approvals from the LUACs, the commission looks at that, and then we could potentially make some requests to make some changes in particular areas. One of the pieces, and that's just in general, but in terms of the Red Barn issue, I think that it might have changed from 30 to 60 events, but that's not the only issue that we looked at. We looked at the sound monitoring, whether there was going to be security, whether safety. We looked at fire issues and whether traffic, and we looked at some of the concerns that the surrounding neighbors had, and the communication that the owner was doing with the surrounding neighborhood, and offering businesses opportunities also, and offering classes to those who wanted to in order to get some business background. So it's not just like, changing from 30 to 60 Ps that made the commission make a decision on whether to approve it or not. It was a variety of factors that we always look at, through whatever we look at, whether it's trees, whether it's setbacks, whether it's whatever that may be. But a lot of that is looked at by the commission, and sometimes we make recommendations to make some changes based on what the commission may think is right. And then if it's appealed, then it goes to the board, and the board can further make changes or approve or not approve a project. So anyways, thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Monsalve?
Thank you, Chair Deal. You said it already, and I want to reiterate, because this is what I had put my hand up originally for, was whenever an application changes after LUAC review, and then it comes to us, because, as you already explained, it can't go back to the LUAC for many reasons. I would like to see those changes highlighted, even if staff didn't consider them substantial. I would still like to know what the changes are to the application, and mostly out of deference to the LUACs that review that application so thoroughly. And then the other thing that I would like to ask about is one of our LUAC members pointed out that they don't get a plantings review. I don't remember who said it, but thank you. That they don't get to see what plantings are proposed for a lot, and I think that that would be important for them to see as well. Thank you.
Okay, did you want to respond to that? I mean, normally landscape plans don't come yet by the time it goes to LUAC, but.
Yeah, I think I heard that as a general, and actually that was one that I wanted to get a little better clarification in terms of what the, yes, what specifically, because I heard it as more of a general concern of having plantings growing in, and not all of those are necessarily a part of projects that are approved. So I think I wanted to get a little more information from the Big Sur LUAC to understand that one a little bit better as it relates to that planning area.
Big Sur is going to talk with Ms. Moretti about this topic. All right, you guys? They're nodding. She's not hard to find. We'll make sure you get an email address.
We'll get one up on Zoom momentarily so that you all have that.
Great.
It seemed very important to me as they were discussing and describing that the issues that come up is plantings go in that eventually block critical view sheds. Thank you.
Yeah, everybody doesn't always have a project when they do the planting either, so that's also an issue. All right, is there anything else pressing? Because if not, I'd like to take a few minutes of a break and come back and move directly into the training items. Is that okay with everybody? Everybody all right with that? Let's take 10 minutes for whatever reason you might see, and we'll see you back here at about 3:25. Right, can we begin to commence to start to get back to business here? I think Robert is getting set. All right. Let's go ahead and reconvene. It is, according to this clock, 3:28, and many commissioners are still talking. Do they need a minute?
No. We're done.
Okay, since they don't need a minute. We're going to move forward, and we are currently starting item number 2, the training items, and we're going to turn it over to County Council to help teach us how to stay on the right side of the law and also to do our jobs as well as we can. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Robert Breyer, Deputy County Counsel. I believe the first few topics Ms. Beretti is going to cover as they relate specifically to this body and the LUACs.
Excellent. I stand corrected.
Yeah, thank you. No, we were a little miscoordinated on today. So, yes, I did just want to take a few minutes. We mentioned it earlier, the establishing resolution that lays out kind of the purpose, the member responsibilities of members, LUAC members, planning commission staff. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this. All of you in joining the LUAC should have reviewed, and I really encourage you do a re-review of the entire resolution. But I wanted to hit a number of key items in there. And I am just realizing that I am not logged into the Zoom. I typically do that. Melissa, are you logged into the Zoom? Can you share the bylaws or can you share it for me so we don't have to lose time for me joining? Yeah, if you can share the resolution, and then I'm just going to tell you which sections I'm going to touch on. And the first one will just be the section 1, which is the purpose of LUACs. Thank you. Bear with us for technology. So while we work on getting screen share. No. Yeah, the resolution. So 1 is the purpose of the land use advisory committees. So it's towards the top. So while she brings this up, I think we've discussed some of this, but it's good to just kind of refresh and review. So 1, overarching the review, so 2 pages down. Right there. Yeah, so for the land use advisory committees, and I think this is some of the, this is really that critical piece which we have discussed, is what is the lens that you as community members, as committee members, are bringing to the review process and the decision makers in an advisory capacity. So you provide your important comments and recommendations on the referred land use planning matters per the guidelines of review. We're going to go down to those as well. Importantly, it's reflecting your perspective as local community members, focusing on that neighborhood character, the unique community site and conditions, potential local effects or contributions that are really critical for any given project. Another really important one is it's a really critical venue for neighbors and the community members to come. It's more accessible. It's more comfortable. It's less, I think, intimidating than the formal hearing can be. On that flip side, it's also important that those meetings be, and I think it had gotten touched on in some of the training in terms of Robert's rules and adhering to Brown Act, so that those are also, you are also a really important safe forum for the community to be able to come together and provide that input and have that dialogue with applicants and their representatives and staff on projects. And then also identifying concerns in response to the information, the scope, and the review provided by staff. And so to the broad extent, and I think it was really well represented, that what that means is it's not just your recommendation, it's the full scope, so that we carry those questions, concerns, important issues forward through that whole process as well. So the next one, I want to go to section 5, which is members. Excuse the scrolling. So I just want to briefly touch on kind of membership as well as appointment procedures, because there were some questions about that. I think one, it just can't be said enough. Thank you for participating, for being willing to take your time to be on the LUAC, and for encouraging your neighbors and community members to participate. We do look to try to have a balance of of membership on the LUAC. For LUACs that are not full, that do not have a high membership, this becomes less critical versus some of the LUACs that have a higher membership, where we really work to, for example, point D, to encourage membership with, individuals who have certifications or experience in kind of the fields of land use and building and trade industries. That's not a requirement because it's a local neighborhood perspective, but we should try to have some balance, and I know our commission tries to look at that. So the goal is to have not fewer than 5 and not more than 9, so that we can get a quorum in there. And you do have to reside within the boundary, typical to your appointments. And I think really important and critically, the importance of attendance at meetings, regular attendance for 80% of the regular scheduled meetings. We know for many LUACs, there's a lot of cancellations, and so that can be challenging when you only have 1 or 2 meetings within a year to attend. So we do recognize that, and we do take that into consideration. But that important aspect of making a point to be there at those meetings, and where possible, adhere to the kind of regular meeting times. I know oftentimes we need to cancel and we'll do special meetings. We make every effort as well to work with you all, but the more we can schedule during those regular established meeting times, it's more predictable for you all and your schedules and ours. So, but again, it can be more of a challenge, we fully recognize, especially for LUACs that don't meet as regularly because there aren't as many projects being referred. In terms of the appointment procedures, so ultimately, you all are appointed through the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission, we as staff liaise and bring forward individuals who are interested, but ultimately it is those are fully vetted through the individual LUAC liaisons, and then per recommendation for appointment to the Planning Commission. That is how the process is intended to work. I see head shaking, and we have been working with the Planning Commission in this over this past year, where we've had appointments to kind of refine and revise the process. For those of you who've been on the LUAC for a long time, we have updated, or in the process of updating, I'm looking to the clerk to correct me, our statement of interest for appointments to a little bit, so that we make sure that we have a good sufficient amount of detail for individuals who are interested, who do submit their statement of interest. That can be included in the consideration by the individual liaisons, as well as by the Planning Commission as a whole for those appointments. We do attempt to bring forward in a timely manner. There have not been, during my time, a huge number of new appointments. So again, I can't speak as much to past appointment process, but we have been working to refine that so that we are getting those processed and brought forward without as much lag time in between, and improving that communication between. The Planning Commission does, so one thing that's particular under here is the Planning Commissioner, who's liaison to that Land Use Advisory Committee, shall solicit input from the represented community, and if satisfactory responses are obtained, may nominate the applicant to the Planning Commission. So in some cases, that does happen, in others that has not happened, but that is a step in the process that sometimes has influenced whether or not a nominee or someone with interest actually is then referred as a nominee from the liaison to the full Planning Commission. Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, that's frustrating. Okay. So that, for some of the questions of what happens in the process, that might be another step in it. And then ultimately, it's the appointment is considered here at the commission as a whole. As I said, we're working to refine it, and I think we will have a discussion kind of at the end. So I think just for getting through these matters, I'd love if we can kind of capture those, and then at the end, when we have a discussion for some of these pieces, flag them for. That would be great to bring that up for discussion so we can revisit those. The other, I'd like to go to 8, which is the committee duties and procedures. And again, not going into detail, but generally as committee members, you should be familiar with the basics of reading plans and construction documents, the basics of the laws, ordinance, regulations, procedures, policies in the land use regulatory process. That can be extensive. We have a lot of regulations and policies, and they're very often gray. Very few things, you shall do this, oftentimes there's room for interpretation. So we understand that, and staff does try to work to provide that clarity, but a general understanding of those rules and regulations and policies that apply to your respective areas. And then obviously Brown Act and Robert's Rule of Order, which is part of the topic today. I think one thing newly created, we don't create LUACs, but newly appointed LUAC members should receive initial training materials and orientation from staff members, not assume the duties until they've received these materials, and then receive annual training from the county. So this is a part of that county annual training. Again, I am newer in the chief of planning position. So in terms of, I'm still working and transitioning with our now director, former chief of planning, Director Spencer, on onboarding and bringing in new LUAC members. I think he's continued to meet with them, but we do prioritize that as a planning department to make sure that we meet with you all as you're appointed to review some of these matters. I think those were the key items I wanted to overview. Again, I really encourage you all to read this, read it in more detail. I pull it out regularly when I'm thinking and interacting with LUACs as well to remind myself on these guidance. I think the next section is section number.
Do we want to just take questions at all if there's any questions about that?
Do you want to do it for each individual agenda? The way it's on the agenda, it comes at the end. I'm happy to do it however.
No, it's all right.
Chair and individuals.
I just want to know when we're going to do that. Fine, you go ahead and people take notes on what you want to say.
Okay. Here's what I would say. If there's something that is absolutely unclear that I say, please raise your hand and flag it then for clarity purposes. But if there are comments, points for discussion, if we can save those for the end, and then we can kind of address all the discussion specific items. We'll do it that way.
Okay, fine.
Okay, so the next section that I want to, so there is section 12 is staff responsibilities. I really wanted to just highlight, this is staff responsibilities we do regularly, and we want to make sure that we are working with our planners. We recognize that we have newer planners that come on board from time to time. We have planners that maybe haven't come to a LUAC yet. So we do work with our planners to ensure, and with our secretary team, to make sure that we're adhering to the staff responsibilities for what's being provided from the department for your consideration. I did hear some of the notes in terms of better consistency and clarity for the materials accessibility for how they're available. So I took some notes on that from the general comments we've got. That I will definitely bring back and make sure that we're revisiting these as a team. We do have planners that attend all the meetings, and that's a really critical role for us to make sure that there is staff available. I know the question had come up about facilitating your own meetings, but because their LUACs are Brown Act bodies, and critically projects need to be presented and importantly heard for input from staff. And staff, we do need to be leading that role, but happy to work with you and refine how that happens within individual areas if there's been struggles with that. And then again,
John had a question.
Question, clarity, yeah, please. So the question was, can we have a LUAC meeting without a planning representative present? I am actually going to,
It says it right here.
sorry. So yes, so under C, thank you. I was trying to find that point. So under C, we appoint a planner to attend all meetings of each LUAC. If the planner is not available to attend the meeting, the LUAC may proceed to hear the project. So I think I would like, in terms of the question of whether or not you can convene a meeting without the planning department and input, I don't know if that's something that county council has thoughts on. It is clear that if a planner is not able to attend a meeting, you can still proceed to hear a project, but that's for a project that's already been agendized, for a meeting that's already organized. So I think the other question, which maybe we just want to look back and clarify, is whether or not you can organize and hold a meeting absent of planning input.
Do you want to weigh in on that? I think the answer is pretty simple, which is I don't think you can because you have to notice it, but what about a council?
I think that's right, and I think that at least planning's input on individual projects would be invaluable to evaluating the project. So it probably would be unwise as well.
Commissioner Gomez, did you want to say
that? And I just wanted to say, I think, a violation of the Brown Act too, in terms of complying with notice requirements.
Mr. Smiley, do you have a clarification?
Big Sur LUAC. The question comes up for preparation for this meeting. Can we get together to talk about what we see as the issues coming forward in Big Sur that are separate from projects altogether? And that's a very different issue than dealing with a project.
Yeah, I'll let council think about that and address it with the notice, because I think that's the issue about whether everybody involved has an opportunity to weigh in. But
and I think, yeah, through council, I think council will hear some of these clarifications, and through doing Brown Act, et cetera, he can have a little time and try to address them specifically. Yeah, I mean, the critical thing is, again, this is a public hearing body. It's a Brown Act committee. It's intended to have public transparency. Part of that transparency includes noticing, includes having an agenda that's available in advance to the public to know what's being discussed, and to not have side deliberations with regard to items that would and or are coming before the LUAC.
And it just seems to me like it's a great question, but one thing we might put on our list is for the agendas on the meeting before we have the annual meeting, put an item for the LUACs to have that discussion. As if it seems like a thing that everybody might want to do. If they don't want to do it, they don't have to. But anyway, just a solution rather than whether or not it's legal.
And then just touching on a couple more. So again, there are some specific, if you go down items F and G, items that shall be furnished by the department and by staff for the LUAC, a set of pertinent planning documents. So again, in the past, those were print copies. We have all of our planning document and regulations online. Occasionally, there are some that the online may be a little delayed, but they're available online. So part of the where to find our regulations for available to you, kind of that onboarding piece is important. And then, of course, we are intended to furnish a copy of the necessary materials. So again, I've noted some of the concerns or challenges with the materials as provided with electronic access and readability. So I'll bring that back to our team to review kind of that process of how we make the pertinent material available to you in a manner that is accessible and legible. So And again, we did touch on site visits, et cetera. So I don't want to go too deep in, but a little further down, for example, arranging site visits if requested. This would include providing reasonable notice to the project applicant and arranging for lawful entry into controlled access facilities, and the agenda clearly stating if entry onto property is required in order to view the site of the project under consideration and the portion of it in the purview for the LUAC. And specific permission, et cetera. So that's the part of the process as well that I do want to understand better from particular LUACs where there have been challenges or questions. So we can talk kind of more specifically on case by kind of LUAC by LUAC on that one. And certainly would like to hear open to general comments as well.
We got to get you on the recording because she can't repeat that. So, but again, I think that what I would suggest is it sounds like which ones? It's Big Sur, it's Carmel Highlands, and who else was having a lot of site visit issues? Toro.
Big Sur, Carmel, Unincorporated, and Highlands, and Toro were the three that I had noted with this. And so, so I'm going to revisit in general site visits and process and procedures for how those happen and are arranged.
I'm hearing that it's a desire of the LUAC and may or may not be the desire of an applicant or a staff member. So we want to be able to work through that.
Yes, which is why I want to be able to understand, because I am aware of some particular projects that had access challenges, and then there's some others. So that, again, project specific versus general process. That's why I'd like to have time to really visit it more clearly and make sure I'm understanding how it's been working from your perspective and from staff's perspective, so that we can make sure that we have better clarity on how we handle those requests and those desires moving forward. Okay, and then going down to 14, which is planning commission responsibilities. I think this is in part the second. So as planning commission, you all are looking to act promptly to fill LUAC vacancies, consider LUAC recommendations when acting on projects. And again, we've talked at length of the detail in the notes really helps inform that consideration. Looking at broader need for LUAC boundaries. I don't think any of those are under consideration right now. Potentially appointing a primary liaison as well as an alternate liaison. Conducting periodic review of the LUACs, including regular review of evaluation cards and comments received. So this is something that from our planning commissioners, I know we've had discussions about. Also the importance of for the liaison to attend at least one, obviously for newly formed, attend at least two, but thereafter at least one meeting per year. In some cases it may be more, in others less, depending on kind of frequency of meeting or any unique challenges that may arise or opportunities. And really being that communication channel between the LUAC and the Planning Commission. And so I think that's something we want to make sure that it's really clear who those liaisons are and that you all are clear on that relationship and the ability to reach out and get in contact with your liaison. And then other responsibilities that may be elsewhere described. And then going down to the guidelines for matters referred. So again, some of these are very explicit and some of them are a little more discretionary for what gets referred, what doesn't. But in general, you shall refer in development that's requiring CEQA review. So if there's a negative deck, a mitigated neg deck, or an EIR, those are projects that are intended to come to LUACs. Lot lines that involve conflicts. So again, we do understand The intention of why lot lines are being referred is if there are potential conflicts with the lot line adjustment itself. We understand the frustration of lot line adjustments are happening for a reason, but that subsequent approval or use or other items don't weigh into the decisions for when and how lot line adjustments. There's other guidance for lot line adjustments and how those can be granted. So it's really those that have conflicts, which are generally ones that may have scenic easements or building envelopes that may be impacted. We do generally look if a lot line adjustment is on property with Williamson Act, or in general if it's in the coastal zone. So depending on which LUAC you're in, some or all of these may be triggered for lot line adjustments. Variances, so anything that's a variance from regulations or from policies, those would come before you. And then design approvals specifically for those subject to zoning administrator and planning commissions. We did hear the input. It is a challenge when there are homeowners associations or CCNRs or other bodies that are private bodies that are intended to inform that design. We do try to work and make sure that those reviews have happened and are informed, but ultimately we as the county on design matters still have to review a design based on our rules and regulations. It doesn't serve an individual if they get approval per our rules and regulations and then are in violation of private rules, but we don't enforce those private rules, so it's a little trickier. And we do recognize that, and we do try to emphasize the importance of properly going through any architectural review board or other review boards that HOAs may have to inform and advise. And then of course, discretionary permits. There are some area plans or land use plans or other plans that specifically call out certain types of projects or matters that must be referred to land use advisory committees. So those are unique to individual areas. Those specific call out items are referred. And then there is sort of that catch-all review of discretionary permits and any land use matter that the board, the planning commission, or director, chief of planning raise as significant and feel that they necessitate review prior. And so that's happened in a number of cases. We've twice have gotten reviewed to all of the land use advisory committees during the many years that we were developing the vacation rental regulations. And that was an important process to say, okay, now it's time to go back to those LUACs and get that input for the new updated, and again, other matters that arise. The next item, so number 4, and I think this is that other piece of the LUAC's focus for the recommendations is on site design and local considerations. I do know, I've certainly experienced and heard there can be some push and pull in trying to, our staff, we are not trying to be obtrusive and not hear input and feedback, but some of the push and pull, I know staff does try to work to make sure that the focus of what comes out of the LUAC is within what those recommendations are intended to consider for projects. And so again, I want to hear in particular cases where that's not working successfully or where the push and pull feels more, anyway, is more nuanced. And I'm only familiar with the instances where I'm familiar with. But generally speaking, there is a limit. You're providing that local considerations as well as site design. And not everything is direct in part of your recommendations. Some of it may just be concerns and considerations, again, that maybe aren't resolved there the day of, but come forward as a part of the consideration for the project as they come forward. That is, again, there's more detail. Really encourage you all to be familiar with it as I do and with our staff to review back to it as well, to refresh and remind ourselves. So I think from there, I think we're on to bullet item number 3, Robert, and I think you're taking the next handful of items. And thank you for sharing the document for me.
We'll do it at the end. Because I want to make sure we get through Robert's training, otherwise we have to do another meeting with training. I promise. And he's going to be really quick, right? He's going to talk really fast.
I'll try. Thank you, Melanie. Thank you, Chair. IT, could you please share, I guess this is screen left. All right, thank you. Good afternoon, members of the Planning Commission and the Land Use Advisory Committees. Thank you for coming and through sitting through what's been an informative, if a long day. I'm Robert Breyer, a Deputy County Counsel, also Counsel to the Planning Commission. I'm going to give you a brief refresher of law, and specifically public law that applies to your roles on the Land Use Advisory Committees and the Planning Commission. It's high level. We're going to look at due process, the Brown Act, conflicts of interest, and the Public Records Act. And I will be happy to address questions at the end of the presentation. I will try to go relatively quickly because we're short on time, but not too fast. So let me know if I'm speeding too much for you. Thanks. Okay, so the focus of today is what you'll need to know to conduct a fair and open public hearing on a land use permit application at either a LUAC or Planning Commission meeting. So the first topic is due process. Due process is guaranteed by both the federal and state constitution. It means that an applicant has a right to have a fair hearing. When you're looking at a land use application, you're acting essentially like a judge, so you're quasi-judicial. That means that they have a right to a fair hearing, which includes notice of the hearing, opportunity to be heard, and a neutral and unbiased decision maker. And we'll look at those separately, quickly. Notice for Planning Commission hearings is governed by state law. It requires a newspaper notice of at least 10 days in advance of the hearing. For LUAC meetings, they're governed by the LUAC procedures that were adopted by the Board of Supervisors that were addressed a bit by Melanie a few moments ago. You're also required to post the agenda per the Brown Act, which we'll talk about specifically in a minute. So at these hearings, applicants and the public are entitled to be heard on land use applications, both in comment before and at the public hearing. So that includes comments sent in to you prior to the hearing as well as those presented at the hearing. Critical part of a fair hearing is an impartial decision maker. That means basically that you can't have actual bias against an applicant or against a project opponent, or an, quote, unacceptable probability of actual bias. Something we say a lot with this area is the appearance of bias can be just as troubling as actual bias, so it's important to remember how you present to the public because their confidence in the system comes down to the impartiality of the decision maker, both perceived and actual. So one example is people who have perhaps made up their mind ahead of the hearing and before hearing the evidence. There's an example here about a planning commissioner that authored an unsigned article in a local association newsletter giving an opinion on a project prior to a PC hearing on the project. And the PC voted against the project, similar to what the article counseled. That decision was invalidated because, while you can't exactly know for sure what was in the mind of all the planning commissioners, that article gave an unacceptable probability that, in fact, there was bias on the part of that commissioner against the project. Basically, the idea for a fair hearing is you have to be neutral and unbiased, keep an open mind. You have to make the decision based on evidence that you receive at the hearing, not prior opinion or evidence received outside of the hearing. In fact, if one of you is a biased decision maker in a decision, a court could later invalidate that decision. And again, they don't need proof of actual bias. That's very difficult to actually get. It's just unacceptable probability of bias. That's usually the circumstances that the court looks at to determine whether a fair hearing was given to the applicant. Moving on to the Brown Act, that governs the conduct of meetings of public bodies. It's the open meeting law. The idea behind it is to give the public the public has a right to see what the government is doing and to participate in the decision making that affects them. The Planning Commission is subject to the Brown Act under state law, and LUACs are subject to Brown Act under the LUAC procedures. Again, the point is transparency and also to facilitate public participation. There is a limited exception to the open meetings policy for closed session for certain matters requiring confidentiality, like pending litigation, employee recruitment, real estate negotiations. That's a separate topic. It's complicated. We're going to stay on the open session focus today, but just so you know, that's out there.
Well, I would also add that the Planning Commission in my duration has never had a closed session, just historically.
Right, that too. Okay, under the Brown Act, there are two types of meetings, regular and special meetings. Regular meetings are passed by ordinance, resolution, or act of the legislative body. They say, we are going to meet on these dates in this year at this place. If you hold a meeting in a different time or place, even if it's a half an hour later than what's noticed on the regular meeting, it's a special meeting. That has consequences for the agenda in particular. For regular meetings, agendas have to be posted at least 72 hours ahead of the meeting. That's not business hours, that's physical hours. Agendas for special meetings only have to be posted 24 hours ahead. The agendas have to be posted in a location freely accessible to the public. So outside this building, you'll see there's a protected bulletin board, meaning you can't access it, that is open to the public over the weekend. All the time, it's outside, and that's important because if it's in this building and the building's locked, the public can't see it, so it doesn't count toward the required noticing time. It is required also to post the agenda on a website, but the hard copy also has to be posted as discussed above. The agenda's point is to provide notice to the public of the items under consideration and the actions that may be taken. In fact, under the Brown Act, no action or discussion shall be undertaken on any item not appearing on the posted agenda. So essentially, it limits the topics and the scope of those topics to those that someone looking at an agenda, if you're in the public, you can look at an agenda and say, would I want to go to this meeting? Is something going to be done that's going to affect me? That's the point. The description should still be simple. It doesn't need to exceed 20 words, but the public has to know about what's going to be discussed and any action that the body is going to be taking. There are some small exceptions here. For example, you can make a brief response to general public comment about an item not on the agenda. You can ask a question for clarification. You can make a brief announcement about or report on activities. That's commissioner comments that we have here for Planning Commission. You can make a referral to staff, asking them to report back at a subsequent meeting on a topic. Or you can direct staff to place a matter on a future agenda. There's 4 more exceptions. We don't have a lot of time. I won't get into them in detail, but there are also emergency situations when actions are discovered between the agenda posting and the meeting. In those cases, you need a 2/3 vote of members present, and you really need true urgency. It doesn't count that staff made a mistake or applicant missed a deadline. It really has to be something came up in between these items and therefore has to be discussed then. This also applies to when there is a justification for an emergency circumstances appearance. That's a Zoom appearance that we're going to talk about in a minute, but the justification wasn't able to be timely placed on the agenda. Again, the public has a right to speak on every item on the agenda before actions taken. However, the agency may adopt reasonable regulations on time for public comment, so they can limit the time per speaker or even the total time allotted to public comment. And the public cannot be required to register their name or answer a questionnaire as a condition of attending a public meeting. The meeting must be held in a publicly accessible location. It's usually within the agency's geographical jurisdiction, as that's where the constituents live. Remote appearances can be allowed if specific criteria are met, including, in one case, if the agenda is posted at its remote location, that location is identified in the agenda and is accessible to the public. The public can testify at that location. There's at least a quorum participating from locations in the boundaries of the jurisdiction. And in that case, all votes taken during such a meeting must be by roll call. So if you have a single member who has to participate remotely, votes have to all be taken by roll call. That's important to remember. There are other circumstances that were passed around COVID times that are still law, where you don't have to have an open location that the public can access. That's when you have very limited circumstances, what's called just cause and emergency circumstances. These require the public to participate remotely. So there are bodies I represent, for example, that do not have Zoom capability, and as a consequence, they cannot use these exceptions. They have to show up. If it's good for the members, it's good. it has to be good for the public. Just cause basically is limited circumstances, care of a child, parent, or close family member, a contagious illness preventing a member from attending in person, a physical or mental disability, or official business travel for that body or another state or local agency. That can be used twice a year, and there's no vote required for it by the legislative body to approve the request to appear that way. For an emergency circumstance, the member has to let the legislative body know as soon as possible and include a general description of the reason. If there's a medical condition, they shouldn't disclose that, just generally that there's a medical emergency. The body needs to vote on that exception, and as I mentioned earlier, if the body's notified of this emergency after the agenda is published, it can be added as an urgency item. So this was discussed a little bit briefly before, what's called serial meetings. So a majority of the members cannot, outside of the meeting, essentially discuss, deliberate, or take action on an item of business within the body's subject matter jurisdiction. So very simply, all public business has to be done in public. And there's a lot of traps that you can fall into with this. We call them the daisy chain. That's if one member talks, so I talk to another member who talks to another member, et cetera, and eventually everybody has talked about the item and knows what everybody thinks. Or hub and spoke, which is when you use an intermediary staff member going between members. So in the modern day, this has some pretty significant implications for email, and especially for reply all, which you really want to avoid. You can't use email to discuss, deliberate, or take action among a quorum of the members for the same reason that you can't do anything else private because there's no public participation in the meeting. Texting also has this possibility. Social media is permissible for body members to answer questions, provide information, or solicit information on a matter within your jurisdiction. But like with everything else, it can't be used by a majority of the members to discuss among themselves, like in a group chat, for example, the subject matter of the body. And that even includes basic comments and simple icons and emoticons. The law also says that members shall not respond directly to communications on a social media platform shared by another member regarding a matter within the subject matter or jurisdiction of the body. So if one of your colleagues posts about something that you're going to hear, don't respond. At least not in that setting. Similarly, there are communications, however, that are allowed outside the meeting. So obviously, excuse me, not obviously, pardon me. As you're doing here today, as LUACs are doing here today, members can attend open and notice meetings of other bodies, so long as a majority of them, again, don't discuss among themselves, other than part of this meeting, business within their subject matter jurisdiction. Members can also attend together social events or ceremonies, again, as long as they don't talk about committee business. Staff can have separate communications with individual members of a body to answer questions or provide information. But staff should not communicate the content of those conversations with other members to avoid the kind of daisy chain or spokes of a wheel problems we talked about before. The only exception really is for scheduling. That's not the Brown Act allows communication among a majority of you to schedule meetings, change meeting times, etc. Now we get into ex parte communications. An ex parte communication would be essentially an individual, either a project opponent or perhaps a proponent, contacting individual decision makers. That is allowed under the Brown Act, but it does raise potential fair hearing problems. Notice an opportunity to be heard includes a right to hear and contest the evidence that each decision maker is considering, which is why it's so important to base your decision on the evidence in front of you at a hearing. It also raises questions potentially about bias. A decision maker has to be neutral. So the recommendation provided here, and I think one that's sound, is if you do have an ex parte communication with somebody, you should disclose it at the hearing. To the extent there's content, you can provide generally what that is, and so that the public has a chance to know what you've done and to comment on it. I think it's always a good idea to disclose anything you have any doubt about. And usually it's just, I had this communication with a project applicant. They answered some of my questions. I don't believe it'll compromise my ability to be fair at this hearing. It's just about openness and transparency once again. So I've mentioned the word quorum. A quorum, as I'm sure you know, is a majority of the membership. So under the PC rules, that's 6 members. Under the LUAC procedures, that's a simple majority. So, you know, a minimum of 5 to a maximum of 9, depending on the size of the LUAC. The quorum is existential, really. If you lose a quorum, the meeting's over. Minutes can't be prepared. You can't continue to conduct business. If you do, you're essentially running the same risks you do for a private meeting under the Brown Act, that we've already discussed. So that is critical. Moving on to conflicts of interest. Conflicts of interest, this ties into what we talked about before a bit. It's a form of bias. There is a complex body of law under the California Political Reform Act, which applies to planning commissioners, and which is good best practices to comply with for LUAC members, which I'll discuss in a minute, in which the official has a financial conflict of interest. What does that mean? Well, a public official can't participate in making, or use or attempt to use their position to influence a government decision when they know or have reason to know they have a disqualifying financial interest. In other words, disqualifying financial interest is if it will have a reasonably foreseeable material financial effect, distinguishable from the effect on the public generally, directly on the official or the official's immediate family. It's a lot, and I happen to address this a lot with folks. I work on this issue separate from this assignment, and the way that I tell people to look at it is very simple. If a matter is coming before you, and you could stand to benefit from it, from the decision, or somebody close to you could stand to benefit from it, you may have a conflict of interest that would require you to recuse yourself from the action. This has some specific requirements. I won't get too into it here. The business entity involved has to be worth at least $2,000, or real property involved, $2,000. A source of income has to be at least $500 to trigger these requirements. If you have some kind of position in management, or perhaps a prior business relationship with a business entity coming before you, that could be a problem. That also includes donations to your campaign made within 12 months before the decision is made. You may be wondering how this applies if you own real property in the area. Obviously, as members of the LUAC in particular, you live in the areas you represent. So the rule is essentially, very clearly, if you have property 500 feet less from the property line of the matter you're hearing, then you would have a conflict unless there's really strong evidence that the decision won't affect you. That could be a lot line adjustment, for example, I'm thinking of in some circumstances, as an example. If it's more than 1,000 feet from the property line, there is a rebuttable presumption that any financial effect is not material. So that just means that the law assumes that it won't affect you in a significant way. That can be different in specific cases, but that's the starting point if a court were to look at it. Now, if it's between 500 and 1,000 feet, it's a lot more complicated. It involves factors we won't get into here, including whether the decision affects the development potential of the property. So I would say consult with counsel to the extent you can, or staff if you have any questions. But these are guidelines in general. Now, as far as the Political Reform Act and its application to LUAC, as I said previously, it's not strictly applicable to the LUAC. However, there are similar laws under what's called common law that prohibit certain participation by a person in a governmental decision when they have a financial conflict, even if it's technically not a violation of the Political Reform Act. So, and LUAC procedures reflect that when they say that members with a financial interest in a matter before the LUAC must and shall disqualify themselves from participation as LUAC members in any discussion or vote on the matter. I mean, that extends to walking out of the room and not being part of it. For the most part, though, you can give public comment, I believe. So What if you have a financial conflict of interest? The government code says you have to publicly identify the financial interest giving rise to the conflict, recuse yourself from discussing or voting on the matter, leave the room until the discussion and vote are concluded. As I said, however, you can speak on the issue, making clear that you're speaking as an individual, not as a member of a LUAC or the Planning Commission, during public testimony. And as I said, it's legally applicable to the Planning Commission, but it's best practice for LUAC members as well. So the simple takeaways are, if you have a conflict of interest, a financial conflict of interest, or any other potential bias, recuse yourself and don't participate in the decision. If you have a question about whether you might have such a conflict of interest, seek advice. County Council, that's our office, we can advise generally as to the rules, though our advice is not privileged with you because we advise the body, not individual members. They're very complicated. I would suggest, and I don't know if this presentation will be made available to everyone later, but I hope it is. The FPPC, the Fair Political Practices Commission, has a free advice hotline for public officials. You can email them or call the number on the screen here. They are very good and responsive. I've used them myself when I'm unclear on things, and they get back to you pretty quickly. You can also reach out to a public attorney, to a private attorney for individualized legal advice in particular situations. Okay, now the Public Records Act. The Public Records Act provides the public with right of access to information concerning the conduct of the public's business. It's complementary to the Brown Act. It includes any writing containing information relating to the conduct of the public's business, regardless of physical forms or characteristics. So it's text messages, it can be chats in online messengers, it can be lots of things. Most public records are subject to public disclosures. There are some exceptions, including attorney-client communications that are privileged and personnel records. There is even a catch-all exception when specific facts show that the interest, this is such a hard thing to say, but the public interest in not disclosing outweighs the public interest in disclosing, and that can occur at times. Exemptions are narrowly construed as the law strongly favors public disclosure. As I mentioned before, email and text messages, even on personal devices, can be subject to the Public Records Act if they relate to the conduct of public business. There's a significant Supreme Court case from 2017 that deals exactly with this, where public officials were using their own cell phones to discuss private matters. It doesn't matter who owns it. If it's public business discussed by public employees, the public has a right to know. Okay, final takeaways. As members of the Planning Commission and LUAC members, you're conducting the public's business, serving the public. Again, the point of all of this is to provide open and transparent and fair governmental processes to the public. They should know what's being done and what's being decided and be able to participate in it as well. When you're not sure what to do, if it's a closed case, remember the purpose of the law. Again, public deliberations should be open and the actions should be fair to all involved. And it goes without saying, these laws are complex and intricate, so please don't hesitate to ask questions, seek resources, and if possible, consult our office, County Council. So that's a lot. I tried to get through quickly because we are short on time, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated, and I'm going to stick with that last part, which says, keep in mind the purpose. So whatever you do, try to just execute that purpose as best you can if you get stuck. I mean, that's all we can do. All right. We have both Ms. Moretti and Council have come forward with a lot of information, and if you have questions, I'm going to go ahead and let people come forward and ask them from the public first and come back to the commission if we can.
Hi, Chair Dale. Can I just make a note for the record that Commissioner Gomez has left?
Thank you. I appreciate that. He's not getting educated. Who knows what he'll do? But if the commission doesn't mind, I just want to go ahead and make sure we hear from the public and then come back to the commission for any final notes. Is that all right with you? So let's start with LUAC people, and anybody has a question, come up here to the microphone and ask it.
questions? I don't know, but certainly a comment. We've added several members over the last year, but there was no back and forth between the Planning Commission and the LUAC. Fortunately, everyone in Big Sur is wonderful, and so all of the applicants that were became members of the LUAC are wonderful people. But there's certainly the chance that there could be, for lack of a better word, a wacko that would be disruptive to being on the LUAC. And so it would be good if the Planning Commission had some kind of feedback with the LUAC members around applicants. Oh boy. Oops, I'm on the wrong page here. Yeah, it's, this site visit thing again. It says pretty clearly in number 12I, arrange for the responsibilities of the planners to arrange site visits if the LUAC, by the LUAC if requested. I think there's still an open question if an applicant refused to have a site visit, what's the next step? I mean, our impetus, I think, would be, sorry, we got to see the site. We're not going to give input on something that we haven't seen. And I think our liaison is Mary Israel, is that true?
From the staff?
Yeah.
I don't know. I haven't.
Planner? Isn't that what?
I think we need to update and hand out a new sheet anyway. We've got a couple of changes that need to be made.
She's been wonderful. She's been a great source of information. Oh, and then one other thing that came up earlier. When there's a fire, I don't know the details of this, but the normal review for a quote new project are bypassed, so those things don't come to the LUAC. We're not a regulatory body. We will offer recommendations to the planning staff, planning commission, but the actual result of meeting with applicants, I think it's almost always true, is that by meeting with us, the project is better. There's things that applicants, especially new owners, may or may not know, and so it's an information thing for them. So I don't know. I mean, it's just a suggestion that it might be a good thing to have applicants post-fire meet with the LUAC, and we may have some helpful suggestions without making a recommendation to the Planning Commission. Oh, and finally, it always used to be that before a LUAC meeting, we would get a packet from the planning department of documents, a set of plans, but also other documents, archaeological, geological, all sorts of different things that we could look at. That doesn't happen anymore. And it makes it difficult in the meeting for all of us to be looking at the same stuff at the same time. And for those of us, myself, that weren't really meant for this century and are challenged by the electronics, I don't know what work has been done. Was there a geology report? What did it say? Was there a, the things other than the set of plans? And, because we don't have a set of plans, and because we don't have internet access where we meet, we're relying on the plans that the applicant brings. I think that's all. Thanks.
Thank you. That's quite an important list of things. Anyone else? Come on down.
Try to make this brief. Question for on-site meetings. I know that we've had a couple cases where we were supposed to, we were able to meet at like 3 o'clock and our meeting is at 4 and it was on the same day. Now, what if all the LUAC members show up on site, because we would probably be at 3 o'clock in order to get back to the meeting at 4, would that be a violation of the Brown Act? That's one question. And then in a meeting, if you had to recuse yourself, and at that point you did that, you would no longer have a quorum. Would that mean that you could not discuss that part of the agenda? Or would that mean that you can't have the meeting at all?
Okay, I'm going to let Robert weigh in right there because those are both things you can address directly.
Yeah, I'll take it in reverse order. The quorum, if somebody out there, and this has happened, I think it might have happened here. I've seen it several times where a quorum is lost by a disqualification, a conflict of interest. And at that point, I think if you have a quorum for the rest of the meeting, you can have it, but I don't think that item could be heard without a quorum. We've had times where it's the only item and you just have to continue the meeting. It's good, therefore, if you have a potential conflict, to let the chair, I don't know if the LUACs have chairs or not, but to let whoever is in charge of the meeting, perhaps it's a planner, know about the conflict ahead of time so they can plan for it, ideally. But yes, if it was something that was discovered at the time and there wasn't a quorum because of it, you couldn't hear it. The first one, I need to clarify. So are you talking about a site visit?
Yes.
So is it like a notice site visit that's part of the agenda, or?
It's like we're notified that if we want, we can show up at 3 o'clock and then, look at the site, but then we have to be at the meeting. That's like the only time. We've had problems with site visits where, it's the day of our meeting and they say that it has to be at 3 o'clock, and that's what the owner agreed to. So if that was the case, if we all showed up at the site, would that be a violation of the Brown Act? I mean, if they had site visits that were 1 week prior to the meeting, and they could say, you can come between this hour and that hour each day of the week so we can stagger, So, but I guess it wouldn't matter if we could all meet. Would that be a violation of the Brown Act?
Well, the violation comes when you discuss public business. If you're all in one place looking at things, I guess in theory, it wouldn't necessarily implicate the Brown Act. If you're talking about, but there's a few things here, because if you're talking about not making the meeting time, and it's a notice meeting time, I guess it depends on how late that is and whether you need to reschedule it. As far as an hour before, that seems like...
Yeah, I'm just throwing it out there. There's ways of maybe having site meetings and not having it the same day, or having it available a few days, a certain hour.
I guess in that hypothetical, I don't think... So are you saying that normally they would stagger it, but in this case they're all together at once? Is that the...
No, I'm just suggesting maybe you could stagger it over a couple days, but there's been some applicants where it's like, it's this time and that's it.
I can weigh in here if it would help. There's two things going on here. If a site visit is on the agenda,
right.
The time is given, everybody can be there, and members of the public get to be there too. And that's one of the reasons that the landowners are sometimes a little bit iffy. So that's a fixed time visit on the agenda. It wouldn't be a violation of the Brown Act if it's on the agenda and the public can attend.
Right.
Now, if you're just wanting to go see something on your own and not with anybody else and not talk about it with anybody else, that's different. Right. Personally, I'm uncomfortable meeting with the applicant on site when I'm just by myself going over to look at a project, just because I think it gives a bad appearance.
Right, but I'm not saying with the applicant. I'm just saying that the applicant, gives you these restrictions or whatever, but.
Yeah, but you would be communicating directly with the applicant in that case, which is a little nervous making if you have to go into private property and you can't do it from a public viewing area, is what I'm saying. So,
Right, I understand, yeah.
So that's what I'm saying. I don't know if it helps or not, but there are different things. You can be all together at 3 o'clock at the agendized item, and so can anybody from the public who wants to attend.
Got it.
That's like,
as long as it's on the agenda.
Yeah, as long as it's on the agenda.
No, that makes sense too.
We have to ask on the mic because we're recording and also Zoomers.
A clarifying question then for you, because we don't often know that there's a meeting until we receive the agenda, and then that's when we request a site visit. And then that's usually when we get pushback because we don't have an agenda for that. So how does this all work then if we don't know about it and then we request a site visit and then we get pushback on a site visit request?
You want to talk about that?
Yeah, and I think, and I think if I can just word it, it's not pushback intended, it's staff realizing, wait, we don't have this agendized, how do we accommodate this? So really the question is, and again, I'm probably going to want to know on more of a LUAC by LUAC basis, because I think, at least my understanding, different LUACs operate and have kind of different ways in which they either want to view all of them or certain ones or no. So, but so really what I'm hearing the question is, how can our staff work with LUACs to know what projects are coming, to know whether or not there could be a request for site visit before we have a published agenda, which then limits that ability. So that's what I heard. It's a process question, so I can't answer it specifically beyond. Let me go look back at the process that we have with our full team to look at how has it been working, how has it not been working, how can we improve that in general for all LUACs, and then if there's any specifics or nuance for individual LUACs that might be further constraining.
I just wanted to make a comment. Belinda Taluba, North County, LUAC. There are jurisdictions within Monterey County that do have the same process as we do, except they do agendize actual site meetings at the properties. And so Carmel is one city that I know of where you will get an item on the agenda and the landowner opens his property 15, 20, 30 minutes prior to the hearing. All public is allowed to go. Usually it's not a discussion at the site. It's the applicant or the planner walks them through. This is the site. Everybody looks at it and then they go back and discuss it at the meeting. But they are agendized and they are actually put to the public and the public can attend. And I know some jurisdictions do it that way. I don't think North County knew that. Most of our commissioners drive around and look at the properties beforehand, but view them from the public way because North County likes to be a little private. But I do know in some of these jurisdictions or different areas, it is much more, there's a lot more constraints that they have and they want to look at those properties. Thank you.
And just to weigh in on that, we do that here. I mean, when we have a site visit, it's an agendized site visit that the public can attend. It's more of a question of when do we need to do that. And I think that Ms. Moretti is going to take a deep dive into that. And I actually have an idea, remind me at the end.
Okay, and then just one other thing about homeowners associations and CC&Rs. When you're dealing with permits, is there a section where it says or asks the applicant that, are you aware that you have a homeowners association, or did you do these, did you check with them first and go through that proper procedure, or do you just kind of, when it comes up to be an issue, then it's an issue? I mean, it could help in the long run if people get permits that they know that they have those guidelines to go through too.
So it depends on what the project is, the location, and the regulations that apply. In general, the county looks to not have our regulations specifically refer to or enforce or have a formal role of private regulations, but there are exceptions. So it's a fairly nuanced, so it's more often outside of specific circumstances. It's more of a where staff knows that there are HOAs and that there are, other review boards, if not required by regulation, which typically is not. We do try to encourage and remind individuals to go there. Depending on we've worked. So yeah, it is variable, but in the end, generally speaking, our regulations try not to require and refer to private rules, regulations, with some exceptions.
So again, if Robert doesn't want to weigh in, I would just simplify that by saying, my understanding is that the County Planning Commission is not in the business of enforcing HOAs, which is a private contract. So yes, we would be absolutely in favor of people knowing that they have one and dealing with that. But I was always told it's not our job to get in the middle of private agreements that are legally determined by the people involved.
Yeah.
Just, our rules are our rules. So
Thank you.
like I said, there's exceptions, but in general, that's what I learned. Mr. Foster.
Yes, thank you. Marcus Foster, Big Sur LUAC. Just regarding conflicts of interest, the financial conflicts are no-brainer. It makes complete sense. But down in Big Sur, kind of everybody, it's such a small community, everybody kind of knows each other, acquaintances, sometimes good friends, sometimes people you don't like. When you have a project that comes up where you might have a friend or somebody that you don't care for. One instance, site visit came up actually for a lot line adjustment on a property that I used to caretake for years and have a deep love of that property. So if you feel any sense of bias on a project, is that reason to recuse yourself from any discussions?
Well, I mean, it is tricky in small communities. Obviously, things that that not everybody knows. Depending on the situation, you have different relationships, like you said. The rules are constructed around very close family members. What I tell people if they're concerned is, I say, do you think that you can make a fair decision regardless of the relationship? And if they do, I still say if you have concerns, it's always good to disclose the nature of the relationship on the record at the meeting, and if you think you can still decide fairly, say that, and if not, recuse. There's never you don't get penalized for recusal. Obviously, it could affect the quorum, but if you are really unsure if you're going to be an unbiased decision maker, then the due process right of the project proponent is at stake, and I think it's incumbent on you to recuse. I mean, so it's very fact specific. It's good to talk to counsel if you can about it. But at the end of the day, if you think to myself, I don't think I can be fair, then yeah, I think you should recuse regardless of the reason. Because everyone has a right to have an unbiased decision maker decide on their project.
Yeah, it makes good sense. Thank you for that. And then one last thing, just to, on the meetings, the public, very rarely do we have public discussion that comes into some of these proposed developments or what they might be on the agenda. Usually sometimes you get a close neighbor, somebody that's going to be affected, might show up, and it's really helpful to hear their side of it. But all in all, you don't get a whole lot of public, and sometimes there's things that come that are pretty, have major implications on Big Sur. And I think it's just the public is not getting the information. I think they would be there to make comments and talk about it, but it's just really hard to get it out there into the public. And I imagine when we do get, the LUAC does get the agenda, I'm assuming it's fine to share that any way we can. Yeah.
It's kind of the point.
Yeah. Is there anything the county can do to notify the public better about projects that come up in the Big Sur area?
I mean, we have our public distribution list helping us add and make sure we have a very robust. It's difficult. We make sure that we certainly make sure that we adhere to what we're legally needing to do. We try to identify projects that we think are going to have a broader ramification, and we try to sometimes push out farther. But it can be a little challenging and on a case-by-case basis. So we really look to the community to help us make sure we've got it pushed out and amplified.
Yeah, I think like CABS, for instance, the meeting earlier today with the moratorium on VSUs, CABS put that out, and it actually goes out to quite a lot of people. Maybe a relationship with somebody like that, and every agenda item that the LUAC sees, they could get a hold of that as well. But
yeah, I think that's a good point. I know we have active discussions internally of kind of making sure that we revisit. We have various public interest lists, certain entities who like to receive everything coastal and everything other. So we try to review those regularly. And I do think, and if we don't, I'm hearing the specific for Big Sur, to possibly consider making sure that on a general distribution for items in Big Sur. So we can kind of revisit that internally. I'll work with what we do have with regards to Big Sur, and then we can see where appropriate for requesting other either entities or others are on distribution lists, so they automatically go to them.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, and I thank you all the commissioners for what you do. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Mr. Foster. Wondering if we could kind of have the same invitation to all the land use advisory committees, to where if there is a better way of getting the word out in your area, that you could let staff know so that we could make sure we did the best we could with that. I mean, it's not just Big Sur. Everybody everywhere wants to participate. Although I will say that evidence would suggest Big Sur is getting the word. Yeah, I think that's a great point. Is anybody else here in the audience want to speak that hasn't said anything? I'm not seeing anyone. Is there anyone online, Madam Clerk?
There are no hands up on Zoom and no additional emails. Oh, never mind. Connie just raised her hand.
Ms. McCoy, you have the floor. You're muted again. What's up with that?
Okay, sorry. Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. Okay, I'll try to be brief. I know everybody wants to get this meeting wrapped up. I might have misunderstood earlier when Secretary Beretti was speaking about what projects come to LUAC. And I got the impression that it was discretionary on the part of county officials, that perhaps they might go by certain guidelines, but not any hard and fast rules for what should be presented. And I just thought that if that is true, it allows for perhaps influencing on the people who do decide what is presented by people who do have their own interest in mind. And also,
can we just stop with that one really quick and we'll go on?
Yeah.
That is not the case. There are written guidelines, and they should be included in the staff report for this item. And if not, the reference certainly is. And I am uncomfortable with allegations of interest on staff members, because that is not only speculative, it's not something that I'm prepared to engage in the safe place of our meeting. So now you can go forward and after that. And I guess if we want to just ask staff to provide again the guidelines for what projects go to the LUACs and where the limited discretion might occur. So maybe you should just go over that one more time.
Yeah, and I think what I just want to say is again, for this training, our clerks will follow up. They'll distribute Mr. Brer's presentation via email to all the LUAC members, as well as we will also redistribute the establishing resolution with the guidance and rules for LUACs, because it is outlined there in the guidance. There are 4 particular types of projects that are referred to as a matter usual course of business for LUACs, and those are development requiring environmental review, lot line adjustments that involve certain types of conflicts, which examples include if they involve scenic easements or changes of building envelopes, Williamson Act contract properties, or if they're in the coastal zone. So if your LUAC's in the coastal zone, then lot line adjustments in the coastal zone would be likely referred. Variances, so when there are requests for a project to be approved with a variance to the established rules and regulations for the area, as well as design approvals for projects that are subject to review per our code by the zoning administrator and planning commission. So those are the types of projects that come to the LUACs. Those aren't highly discretionary. When we have something that meets those criteria, we refer it to the LUAC. Where there is the ability to, in addition, the LUAC can review other discretionary permit applications or any land use matter that, in addition, is in the opinion of the Board of Supervisors, the Planning Commission, or the Director or Chief of Planning that raise significant land use issues. So those are more cases where, even though it's not a standard project that would get reviewed to the LUAC, as a policymaker or decision maker, we think that it's still important that it be referred to a LUAC given its potential for significant issue. So I hope that clarifies a little bit more. It wasn't intended to go the other way in terms of kind of the discretion.
That is a board order that you're reading from. So it's not like she just made it up. Anyway, Ms. McCoy, back to you. I'm sorry to have interrupted.
Okay. Hi. Okay, thank you very much for that. And I do apologize if you thought that I was insinuating that the county officials might be influenced. I just always am open to the realm of possibility. And I certainly didn't mean for it to be taken that way. So I do apologize. Okay, I do want to say that, okay, allowing for that, and I am glad to hear that it is not discretionary. It does go by certain guidelines. And I thought that was probably true, and I had misunderstood. So I do want to ask this. Is it possible for the LUAC to be at least informed of what projects come up that we are not going to have presented to us that are within the areas that we are responsible for?
So one thing that we've discussed and we'll look into is ways in which the LUACs themselves could be a part of the public distribution. We can look at it 2 ways, both for projects that have been referred, so that when those do move forward to the appropriate authority for hearing, that the LUAC would get advised. In addition, there are a number of other discretionary type projects that would go to public hearing or otherwise, or have that we could also look to add the LUACs as a general public distribution for any discretionary items that would be moving forward to hearing for items within your areas. That would be probably the simplest way that we could do that. And then you would keep informed. Not all decisions made by the again, our regulations balance due process for applicants, clear process. Not all decisions and land use decisions elevate to a public hearing and kind of that public noticing. And so there are decisions that are made at more of the departmental level, which, so I don't know if some of the projects that folks are thinking of that aren't coming perhaps at that level, but for anything that would be moving forward for discretion and to a hearing body, we can absolutely address that kind of LUAC information through our public distribution lists.
Thank you. Does that answer your concern, Ms. McCoy? Was that it?
Yeah, yes, it does. Yes, it does. Thank you very much. And I do appreciate that explanation. Now, here's something that a member of my community asked me to bring up earlier, and I neglected to, and now they're asking me why I didn't. So I will bring it up. They're concerned about unpermitted improvements made on private property that actually enables that private property to conduct business, and when that business, to their knowledge, has actually had the county come in and fine them, and then the business is actually still conducting business, and also they have not paid their fines. So that comes not necessarily from me, but I agree to it with it to a certain extent. So I just wanted to pass that on. And thank you very much. And I do appreciate all the hard work of you officials in the county in representing our views. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
I think just briefly on that, for any member of the public, if there is activity that is observed that is a concern that is unpermitted or operating without benefit of permits, if they were needed, those are handled through our code compliance team. Sometimes it can take, in order, we also have to do due process when addressing code compliance circumstances. So sometimes they can, an individual circumstance, if it's been reported to us and been investigated and received a formal notice of violation, then it also moves through a due process, so it can take some time. So we certainly invite individuals to, if they see activity that they're concerned is not permitted and or they know is in that process, to reach out, and that can be reported anonymously to our code compliance team. And they can also, those kind of status updates to the extent of the information that is available for being disclosed publicly can also be accessed through our code compliance and through our Acela online. It's not the easiest process, but you can also check status there.
Thank you for that. All right, I don't see any more hands up, Madam Clerk.
There are no hands up in Zoom, and there are no new emails.
Okay, we're going to stop that part, and I was just going to, I have a note here to respond to Mr. Beck, who kind of came early in the process and we weren't having quite as interactive a conversation. And one of the points that I heard him make had to do with the LUAC weighing in on applicants to the LUAC. And since I'm the liaison to that particular LUAC, I would say that in many cases, I know the individual or of the individual, and I don't often need further discussion about them because of my strong feeling that somebody who wants to be on the LUAC is better than a vacancy on the LUAC. So it seems to me really important to realize that I start with that basic, in all the LUACs I work with, I start with that basic thought that I would always prefer, unless we know that somebody is a major criminal, in which case they're not going to be somebody we want to have on there. It's still always better to have the points of view that we have in the community on the LUAC if we can get them. So just my own personal feeling, I am biased in favor of somebody wants to do it, yeah, let's let them do it unless there's a really strong reason why not. So just a response to that, response to the need to update the liaison list so that we have correct current information. I think we knew that. And one response to a comment that I really take to heart, which is when the LUACs meet with an applicant, if all goes well, the project's better as a result. That's the goal that we all want. And that is exactly the case. Those conversations are vital. They really help everybody. And it's also super important that at no point in the setting does it appear that it's gonna, that the LUAC is extracting some kind of concession from the applicant. Unless the applicant is willing to subsequently change their application to reflect the provisions that they talked about with the LUAC, it isn't real anyway. If they just say, yeah, we'll do that, it doesn't mean anything. And I know that none of the people here are likely to have done that, but we have had situations in the past where we had LUACs that said, we're going to keep continuing your project until you do what we said. And that's the back end of it. You just have to be aware of that slippery slope and working with the applicant and making sure that you're helping them understand and not trying to force them into doing something. It sounds really esoteric, but we've had that happen, and I don't think anybody here intends to do that, but the appearance is also really important. Those are the notes that I just wanted to address myself. Anybody else heard anything that they wanted to address? Commissioner Roberts?
The only thing I wanted to address was the idea that when applicants apply to the LUAC and maybe there's a lag in time, for me personally, if I'm liaison to the Toro LUAC and the alternate liaison to the Greater Monterey Peninsula LUAC, reach out to me, send it to me, let me know there's somebody in the pipeline. I would guess that everybody here would say the same for their LUACs, so that we can help stay on that also and say, hey, staff, let us know what the status of this new application is. And that, I should say, that goes for any issue that comes up at the LUAC. Even if I'm not your liaison, or I think any of us would be open to trying to help solve a problem that's happening at the LUAC level. If you're not getting the response or the help or you don't know where to go, we can try and help you with that.
Anything else you'd like to say? Anybody I think Rick wants to come forward. I'm going to let him do that. One last thing, yes.
The conversation about the other projects that LUAC doesn't get, do you have a rough idea of what's the proportion of the total projects LUAC does get? Is it half of them, a quarter of them, 30, 90% of them?
I'm not able to speak to that, and it's going to depend on the LUAC and the area, because different areas get a different number depending. So yeah, I can't speak to that. We probably can extract some data to see how many went forward and how many of those went to the LUAC. But anyway, I'm not able to speak to that.
Not looking to be precise. I'm just trying to get an idea of what we're all in for.
I mean, we can certainly look at over the last couple of years how many projects went to LUACs to different LUACs for review based on agendas, something like that, if it's trying to understand a volume of what comes to the LUACs.
Yeah, I think he wants to know what they're not seeing. All right. Is there any further business before us? Seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and adjourn this meeting at 4:59 p.m. And thank you all again, more than I can say, for coming and for doing what you're doing.